a lot of heat was never an issue for us. But if the honey was experiencing anything more than 80 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of months, honey does start to degrade. The diastase enzyme is depleted over time, and the HMFs, I don't know if you're familiar with the term.
Yes.
Yeah, hydromethyl furfural is increased over even just a few short months in subtropical environments, which is you and I. We have this one thing that to deal with on a regular basis with our honey. So this is one way you can tell your customers your honey is very fresh because we really have to harvest and move our honey pretty quickly in order to have that good quality honey, right?
Yes, definitely. That's one of the ways that you can tell if honey is being heated from the HMF value. If people have heated the honey excessively, so it's good that people are familiar. Some people, if the moisture content is a little too high, they will heat it to bring it down. But when you heat to bring it down, your HMF value does increase. So you have to be cautious of that practice. We have another question from Risha. How do you sanitize the jars before you add the honey? By steaming or with bleach? How can plastic jars be sanitized?
Great questions. So we use glass a lot in many of the shows. If you decide to use plastic, use the denser plastic. The PET plastic is really easy to clean with soap and water. You can use a very, very small amount of chlorine or bleach if you want, as recommended. This is something you can look up online for sanitizing the amount of bleach per water, parts per million. I don't have it committed to memory, but there is a number that you could look. We could maybe look that up before the end of the day and post it for everybody. The steam method works brilliant for glass. It's not so great for plastic. But I use soap and water, and then I do rinse, and then I do the diluted chlorine to parts per million. That's adequate. And then I allow the jars to dry. And then I check each jar for spots or debris or anything, and I polish them well. And I'll show you later how to polish the jars. But any cloth, even the same type of cloth that I'm recommending you filter your honey in, you don't have to buy anything fancy. You can use a shirt or t-shirt or something that you've had in your drawer from forever ago that you've never worn, and you decided you were going to keep it anyway. And as long as you wash it several times so there's no cotton lint or debris coming off of it, you can test it on a jar that you don't care about. You start rubbing the jar with it, and if you see any lint or debris come off onto the jar, you know that cotton hasn't gotten rid of all of its particles yet, and you need to wash it a few more times and let it dry and test it out again.
Okay, we've got another question from Jennifer Douglas Bullock. She asks, what are recommended packaging materials to ensure that quality is maintained? So I think it's probably glass you're going to go with.
Yeah, the glass is really what we recommend. And when you say quality, you mean for the duration of maintaining like bottled honey that's going to be brought to the customer, like over time?
I think possibly for show and customer. I mean,
okay.
Customer will be very expensive to run the glass all the time. You might work with a cheaper plastic for your customers, depending on who they are, the target group. But I guess for show, we've referenced the show. I think she's talking to.
I hope this helps answer the question. I usually wait until a few weeks prior to the show to prepare my entries. So we have a lot of time to get prepared so you can practice. But if you really want to get your entries ready, I recommend waiting till a few weeks to a month prior to the show. So it won't be sitting in the jars for quite too long. And I think that's a very safe and reasonable amount of time for the honey to still remain in really excellent condition.
All right. We've got David Small from Barbados. He says he uses muslin for filtering. Is good to use. He uses muslin, MUSLIN.
Thanks, David. David and I have met, and he's attended one of our University of Florida, actually more than one, honey shows. And it's nice to hear that you're here on the call, David. Thank you for sharing that. If there's no other questions about that, we can move on and we can
I think everybody's okay. Oh, one last question from Risha. If there is a market for is there a market for unfiltered honey? What are the benefits to filter the honey besides the look? Does the debris degrade the honey?
My personal opinion is that honey unfiltered and unprocessed straight from the hive is what I like to offer my customers and what I do on a regular for regular practice. I do look for larger particles, bee parts, cappings and things. If I'm going to offer cappings, it's a separate product. But we don't filter or heat our honeys, even if they start to develop crystals. We just let people know that it's winter time and our honeys naturally tend to develop a little crystals around 60 degrees Fahrenheit and under. But some of the honey shows you'll find all over the country and the world have this criteria for judging the honey. And since this is the criteria for some of these shows, I want to share it with you. However, there are shows that don't, and types of judging that don't do this. And one of the examples was the show in Montreal for Appomondia. And since that rotates a different country every 2 years, it would be nice to see it each time and how the honey shows continue to evolve. But all types of packaging were used. The honeys were not prepared to this degree of filtration or cleanliness. All the honeys were shipped in from all over the world. So this stuff that we're learning together and sharing with each other today was forgiven in that particular type of show. So you could certainly entertain forgiving that in your show, especially with some of the classes, maybe not the class that we're talking about where you have to have 3 exact matching jars, but there's going to be another class that we're going to talk about after this one called the novice class. And the novice class is a wonderful opportunity for anyone who's never entered a honey show before, because you only have to prepare 1 jar of honey. And maybe in addition to only preparing 1 jar, the honey show committee would agree to allow any type of packaging and not be too strict about the filtration. Again, this is just to educate and also give you options. But, I'm going to recommend that the honey show itself, the organization, decide on the criteria that they'd like to instill upon each entrant. But I want you to be prepared should you like to enter the National Honey Show someday, or another show that might require this type of process. Okay. So there's something I haven't covered yet that I know will affect you as it affects me. So if it's okay to move on, Richard, we're going to talk just a little bit about moisture.
Yeah, let's I'm gonna suggest we move on for now. I see
Okay.
1 or 2 questions, but they're not 100% relevant, but we can come back to it. I'll promise Jennifer Douglas I will come back to your question. But let's push on a little bit first. Thank you.
Okay. So the other thing is, just real quick, if it's okay with you, Richard, just 2-minute break. I'm gonna get a glass of water,
Sure.
and I'm gonna get my refractometer. So when I come back, we're gonna take a couple of readings on some honeys that I have here in the room, and we'll talk a little bit about moisture content.
Perfect.
So
Perfect.
2 minutes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna just try and answer Jennifer Douglas's question. Can you share basic food safety practice used during harvesting? You should always focus on your best food practices. We can circulate some information for you after the session, but I mean, if you're in the Caribbean area, you should just contact with your local Ministry of environmental health. They should have guidelines for food safety practices. One of the first things you should do is get your food handler's license as a food practitioner. That's very important that you get a food safety handler's license, a little booklet. It's normally in St. Lucia. It's a little red book. Most persons that are working in the food and beverage industry should equip themselves with one of those. You go to the doctor, they do the usual urine test, stool test, and they make sure there's no pathogens inside of your body, which you could pass on through the food that you're handling. So I think this is a good first step that you should follow, but contact your local food safety agency or your environmental health agency. They should be able to guide you accordingly on that. I'm going to try and take a question from Lorraine Archibald. Hi, Lorraine. Can we hear you, Lorraine? Hi, Lorraine. Nope. All right, I can't hear you, so I'm gonna. Lorraine, you have a question? You want to type it in the chat or you want to ask it directly? Okay. Let's try Kashima. Kashima, can you go ahead with your question? You can, yep, Kashima, you can speak. All right. Kashima and Lorraine, if you could just put your questions in the chat. If you click on the question, there's a button at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. If you click on the Q&A button, you could type your question there and we can answer it there for you. All right. Lorraine, you want to try again? Try talking now, Lorraine. You should be able to talk. No. All right. Does anybody with any questions just press the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom panel, and you'll be able to post any questions you have in there. Yes, Janelle, Alexander, you missed the first 30 minutes. There will be a recording made available of the session. It'll be on our YouTube channel, ianolaapiculture.org. You can get a link from the website, or you can get it on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. So you should be able to get that there. Lorraine, you want to try again? I see you put up your hand again. You could speak, Lorraine. Unmute yourself and you could speak, Lorraine. Unmute and speak. No. All right. I will post. All right. Okay, so we answered the recording question. I've answered that. Jody Samuel, need help against ants around my hives at night. How can I prevent them from getting inside? Jody, the good thing you can put around your hives, cinnamon powder is a good deterrent for ants. You could also put small, if your hives are on stands, you could put them on stands and put small containers of old motor oil in the feet. So you can take grease and smother the legs of your stands with grease also. That might help as well for ants. That's another option for ants as well. I hope that answers your question. Okay, Jennifer, you ready to take over or you're good?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead, fire away. Let's hold questions back. We'll stop we'll take a break in about another 10 or 15 minutes when Jennifer wants to take a break, and then we can answer some more of your questions as we go along. Okay, fire away, Jennifer. If you need me to move the slides, or do you want me to let me take out the, stop the share screen and have your camera on focus.
I'm going to give you just one more minute on this slide and then ask you kindly to let me be in view.
Okay.
One of the important aspects of this particular slide is something we haven't addressed yet. And just to review with everybody, because I don't know about you, but if I hear it about 10 times and it's repeated and then I sleep on it, sometimes it's a little bit better for me. But I just want to remind you some things that we've already talked about, plus some that have joined that maybe didn't hear. We talked a lot about the glass, and the packaging that's used for honey shows, preparing the honey. by filtering it through a cloth, something as simple as a piece of a t-shirt that has been washed many times and doesn't have any lint or debris that comes off of it. So that would make a nice clean honey with no bubbles or debris in the jar, making more than you need. So if it's 3 jars that's required, you'll be reading rules prior to the show to make sure that you have everything in order. And following those rules is going to really increase your chances of success and winning a trophy or a ribbon. Then you'll find out more about the style of packaging that's required and the type of honey, but look at the color of this honey. So we talked about all of those things, but there's 3 classes of extracted honey in many of the shows that you might be entering in competition. This is the light amber, and I've included a grading color scale that we'll see a few slides ahead, but this is a really good indication of a light colored honey. I don't produce too much where I live, the region of Florida and the part of the US that I live. We only have some honeys that get this light. And it used to be our citrus honeys that would get pretty light. They're a lot darker now. The trees themselves are not as healthy and are struggling to produce nectar. And as a result, we're seeing darker colored honeys, which is an interesting thing to share with you. Also, a lot less volume of honey is being produced by the bees in those particular trees. But I notice honeys that are beautiful like this where I live in the United States, and I'd love to hear more from you sometime about the honeys that you have where you live and what you produce with your bees. In the US, I see honeys like blackberry and fireweed, to name a few, and tupelo and acacia that are all very light colored honeys, similar to the one you're seeing in this slide. So if you're lucky enough to produce a honey that is light in color like this, you would have a beautiful entry for the light amber honey class. Now, Richard, if I could just have a few minutes of looking at me so I can show you this one piece of apparatus and talk a little bit about moisture. Where I live in Florida, we have a very high humidity point in our weather system. So there's constantly moisture in the air and lots of it. And honey is hygroscopic by nature. So being that it can pull the moisture directly out of the air, we tend to have honey that is very high moisture, even for salability. And somebody asked about food safety earlier. Where we live, we have a lot of regulations in order to sell honey. We register our bees, so we have to register our apiary. If we're going to sell, harvest and sell honey, we have a couple of options. We can do it through what's called the cottage food law, which enables us to sell directly to a customer, like at a market, or directly to them. But once we start selling it through a store or directly to a store, we have a lot of other regulations and permits that we need to have in place in order to sell honey. And one of the rules is the moisture content of our honey here has to be under 18.5%, which is really hard to do because some of our honeys are tipping on that 18 to 18.5% naturally. So even though the bees have sealed the capping, the comb with cappings, and they've told us that they've reduced the moisture to a percentage that they're comfortable with, we know that it can still absorb some moisture from the air. So how we handle it from that point after we remove it from the bees, who are already regulating that humidity in the hive for us and keeping that honey from fermenting, we have to imitate that. So I have a room where I bring my frames home or to my extracting area that is full of fans. And those fans help move and circulate air throughout the room and dry the honey and keep the honey under 18.5%. And in fact, if you need to, you could probably reduce the moisture a percent or two just by running the air through the combs if they're stacked in boxes, which is a practice that we regularly do here where I live because our honeys are always very close to the edge of what's not legal to sell it. So the piece of equipment that I use to test the moisture content is just a simple refractometer. If you've never seen one, They're pretty easy to come by. You can look it up online through the Holmes. The word refractometer in boxes, used which is something a practice that we regularly do used in the baking industry because our honeys the brewing industry close to the edge of it's called the bricks reading, and each refractometer is used for different things. To test the moisture content. Refractometer is specifically for honey. If you've never seen it says honey on it, so we know that it's the right refractometer. Come by, and it's really easy to use. If you've never used one, it has a small lens used to test pressures that we regularly it's used in the baking industry with a little lid that always over close to the edge for viewing. It's called has a graph reading, and so I look at it. Refractometer is used for different things. The moisture particular refractometer actually specifically for percentage of moisture honey on it, so we know that it's the right. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy for one if you've never used one. It has a small lens used to test pressures that we regularly use water baking industry with a little lid that always over to the edge for viewing. It's called has a graph reading, and each refractometer is used for different things. The moisture refractometer specifically for percentage of moisture honey on it, so we know that it's the right. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for viewing. It's called graph reading, and each refractometer is used different things. But these particular refractometer specifically for percentage of moisture I know that it's the right. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for viewing. It's called graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular refractometer specifically for percentage of moisture I know that it's the right. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for viewing. It's called graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture for graph reading, and each refractometer has different things. But these particular specifically for percentage of moisture takes a bit of time. It's very easy to do, and it's really easy to share with other refractometer has a blood pressure that we regularly use baking industry with a little lid that moisture
Yeah.
you have questions on it, we can talk about it, but I'm going to tell you a couple more things that are really important. Bring extra lids with you, because when you get to the show, if you open your jar before you hand it in to the secretary for the staging, you're going to want to make sure you open the jar and look on the inside of the lid and that there's absolutely no honey that got on the inside of the lid. So a clean lid is another thing that the judge is looking for. The inside rim of the glass also should be free of honey. So you're probably thinking now, how in the heck am I going to do that? How am I going to get this jar of honey that I've meticulously cleaned and polished? I've spent weeks filtering my honey, free of debris, free of bubbles. How am I going to get this to the show? Well, there are a couple things you can do. You can make a little case out of wood or cardboard that you can transport your honey in. And you can take the same kind of cotton that you use to filter your honey and cut extra pieces of it. Make sure it's completely free of lint and debris. And you can use that as padding to hold your jar secure in the container or box that you're going to bring it to the show in. Of course, you want to keep the box as level as possible so that the honey isn't moving about inside. So that's another tricky aspect of preparing your entries and getting them to the show. But what you want to bring with you to the show is a clean cloth, like we talked about before, a little washcloth or something that you know has no cotton lint that's going to come off of it, and a little jar of water. And then you want to wash your hands well and wear a pair of gloves. You can use the rubber gloves, the kind that don't have powder on them. So like the nitrile gloves that we sometimes wear when we're beekeeping are good. Any kind of little plastic glove that you can, or rubber glove that you can wear that won't give any prints on your glass. And if you have a little bit of water, you can dip it in the water. You gently open your jar and take off your lid, inspect it for cleanliness, and you can hold the jar carefully and spin this clean cloth with a little bit of water around the inside edge of your jar to clean off any possible honey that may have gotten there. You can use the same technique to clean the lid if you need to, or use your extra lids. If you see any bubbles or sediment or debris that may have settled on the surface of your honey, so you take the lid off and you take a flashlight and you look at the surface of your honey inside the jar, you do the same thing we're talking about with the cloth, but use a little spoon, like a little teaspoon. And you simply take the teaspoon and you dip it in a little bit of water and you go around the inside edge of the jar and just you're skimming off that top layer of honey. You've got your cloth nearby, you're wiping it off, and you do it a few times until you're comfortable. And give yourself extra time to get these entries ready. So if the honey show rules are going to give you the schedule and the rules are going to give you the times that you need to arrive in the morning or the day before in order to get your entries submitted. If it says that the entries are accepted until noon, try to show up a good 2 hours earlier in case there's a little bit of a line. There's going to be an area set up there for people to sit down carefully, quietly, and prepare their entries so that they're comfortable with them before they're turned in. So if you have all these things with you, you'll have time to get everything just right before you hand it in for the show. So those are the other aspects of preparing the entry that I wanted to share with you. And the final one is using the same kind of cloth that's dry and taking your glass and giving it a good polish. So you're on a table surface and you're really going to go around it everywhere that your fingers may have put a little smudge or a fingerprint or a possible sticky spot. And this is the thing that you want the judge to see. Really shiny, really clean looking glass, clear honey. I mean, so clear that there's absolutely nothing, no flaws. And that is going to give you such an edge to your entry and possibly winning an award. But take all the time you need before you get ready for that show to have everything just right. And if you have extra entries with you, again, if you find one is underfilled or overfilled, you can use your spoon to fix that error. So you can change the fill level. I'll give you a hint that a teeny bit overfilled is much better than underfilled. If the judge has to look at 100 entries and they start going down the line and they see a lot of underfilled entries, they're likely going to not go further with those entries, but they'll continue on with the ones that have the proper fill level. So give yourself all the advantages that you can. This is the most I feel like I can share with you right now about getting these entries ready, and I'd be happy to talk about questions before we take a break so that we can address anything that you might be wondering about that I've mentioned.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was
Um,
just saying that I felt like we covered a lot of what we needed to for extracted honey. Uh,
yes, I have a few questions. There's a few questions in the Q&A thread. I could let's start from the top. Let's start from the top. Okay, so Jennifer Douglas Block, she asks, can you share basic food safety practices? I suggest you contact your regional body, such as your environmental health institute or your food safety agency. One of the key things that I suggest all beekeepers in the Caribbean have their food handler certificate. You go to the doctors, there's a basic form, and as a food practitioner, you should have a certificate to handle food. David Small asked Jennifer if he can use this session as part of his profile. Okay, that's a side question. Stephen Slater, Jennifer, the honey show at Appomondia, Montreal was amazing. Did you enter? If so, how did you do? Thanks.
so I wish I had an entry in Appomondia. I thought about it many, many times, but at the end, I really didn't. And now I'm sad I didn't. I really should have, because once I saw how lenient they were with the preparation and the packaging, I felt more encouraged, but I had never attended Appomondia before, so I wasn't sure what to expect. The first place winner in extracted honey was in just a simple plastic bottle with cap. It wasn't filled properly. It had bubbles and sediment, and I left there feeling like a super person that could have easily, entered the competition and possibly won an award. So now I'm more encouraged, but sometimes that's what needs to happen in order for us to have the experience to know what to expect. I just want to show you too real quick. This is the plastic cap that I showed you in the picture, and this is the liner. So if I was getting ready for a show, I would just take something sharp and I would take that out before I even screwed it on top of the jar. I didn't realize I had a cap close by, so I wanted to show you that. And yeah,
Okay.
for food safety, contact your local government regarding their requirements for handling food. We sanitize everything in our area. We've got all the proper permits for food handling. We talked about how we keep the honeys here below the legal moisture level, and we monitor. Additionally, we keep records on each harvest. So each honey has a batch and lot, and when we extract it, we assign it that number and date. And when we put it in the bottle and send it to the stores, we actually make a notation in our logbook regarding that batch and lot in case there's ever an issue. We only would have to take out or recall the honeys from that particular batch, and we would be able to go directly to that number and that batch. It would be a lot easier than having to sort through a whole year's worth of honey harvests and bottles that went out to different stores. So I hope that that's a helpful tip.
Yeah,
Too.
traceability is a very important thing. How do you spell bricks? With regards to the refractometer, what's the spelling of the bricks? The word brick.
BRIX.
BRIX, correct.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got another question from Risha. What affects moisture in honey? Is moisture content affected by time of storage or packaging?
It can be. It depends. It depends on the moisture content at harvest time.
Yes.
Again, like Richard was saying, you can check it in the field with your refractometer. Generally speaking, most species of bees won't cap honey, nectar that hasn't been ripened enough into honey. They're reducing it from 70 or 80% down to that number that we're looking for. But some species and in some circumstances, we find over time, if the honey hasn't been taken off the hive quickly or the hive is weak, and the weather is very hot, we can see a fluctuation in that result. So it's up to us to, check that number. You could possibly dry the honey if you get it home and it's a little high. But again, taste it, make sure it's tasty, palatable. because you don't want to offer your customer something that has an off flavor or is already starting to ferment. And I've actually definitely, especially with small hive beetle, have seen this issue in hives that were starting to weaken with full boxes of honey on top. And, you know, the beekeeper gets excited. Oh, I've got 3 or 4 supers I can take away at least. I'm losing this hive. But in the end, because of the beetles, we have an issue with the honey, either in yeast or some other fermentation from moisture.
Yeah, you could, or you'll lose your reputation.
Yeah.
Siobhan Walker Ashby, good day. Kindly reconfirm the quality of honey required for the show. It'd probably be an 18% moisture content. I believe would be a good bet. Best bet 18%, not
Yeah.
19, 18.
Yeah. And honestly, if you could be lower than that, it's great, because again, sometimes the judge might, he or she is going to, you know, check the viscosity with a tasting rod by dipping it in the honey and then lifting it up, and the honey's going to run off the rod. And likely if it's thin, they're going to question the moisture content. So then you're at the will of a piece of equipment like the refractometer. And again, if it's the calibration is slightly off, you could be so close that they have one other entry that's as good as yours, but is 17%. Yes. And likely that will win because of the fact that it's not so close to the edge. So you want to give yourself every advantage. So check off all the boxes and do your best in that regards. But if it's a region of the country or the world that in where you live that the honeys are all typically high moisture, then I would recommend that the show committee and the organization be a little bit more lenient on moisture, as long as the honey is flavorful and doesn't have any other issues, that they might be a little bit more understanding about being close to the edge, because that's more common. We've had honeys entered in our shows from other places where we weren't lenient and we upset the entrant. And then we had to have conversations with them after and make apologies and thank them for bringing that to our attention. Because, you know, again, it's up to the entrant to follow the rules for the show, but it's up to the organization to be understanding about what the criteria is. So if we know we have a lot of attendees coming from a part of the world that the honeys are high moisture, the show committee should consider that before posting the rules and be aware of that particular detail.
Okay, that's good. And I think Siobhan asked, she was actually referring to quantity of bottles. I think it's three for free.
Yeah, three
go
1
ahead.
pound. Yeah, sure, no problem. 3 1 pound bottles is very standard, so 16 ounces. And again, I recommend making 4 or 5 or even 6 of them, so you have them in case there's an issue with 1 or 2 or 3, or possibly for another class in the honey show. Should you make them and the show has other classes, you might be able to enter with those other jars. So.
Yeah, and also if we do the novice category, it would just be 1 single bottle for the novice category.
Correct.
All right. Question from Risha. This question is for me, Richard, okay, and the organizers. Some countries prohibit honey entering the country. TNT, Trinidad and Tobago is one of them. If entrants are bringing their honey products to the honey show, is a psychosanitary certificate sufficient? We are working on that at this time. At this point, we will be opening. We're taking guidance from our Ministry of Agriculture if they're going to give us permission to open all the categories, all the honey categories to outside to the region. But for sure, persons who want to enter the photography and the arts can definitely do so. Persons that wish to enter the wax and beauty product section, they can do that from the region. Persons wanting to enter the mead section of competition could definitely do so from the region at this time. And I'm missing one. I think I'm missing one. The honeys, we still have to work on the logistics of doing that with the Ministry of Agriculture. So if it doesn't happen this year, definitely the following year we should have the logistics sorted out. But definitely the categories that don't involve honey, we'll definitely be able to allow persons to enter at this time, but we're still working on logistics. Probably by June, we'll be able to make a final decision if we'll be able to allow international and regional classes to enter honeys to enter. The cake, I just remember the cake. If you want to send us a honey cake all the way from Jamaica, I would love to taste it. So the cakes, you should be able to, the cakes and the open class category, you should be able to enter for that extra from the region. So I hope that answers your question, Risha. Jennifer has another question. It's good that you have effective traceability system. Everybody should have this traceability system. You should, if you're selling your honey in any of one of the islands, it should have a section on the back of your label that should have a batch code for you to enter your batch number, your batch information. All of us should be doing that. If we're not doing that, we're doing something wrong. All right, so you should make that provision for yourself. If it's not enforced in your country or your region, do the self regulatory thing and get yourself to the international standard, so that at least you can stand above the rest when you go to marketplace with your products. So okay, we've answered Siobhan already, the quantity issue. Hugh Smith joined late. Can you guide me to the website with all this information? Tomorrow we will have your colleague tomorrow, Jennifer.
Carla
Yeah. Will be on, and she's got her website is Appy Solutions Consortium. And they have a lot of information as to judging and competitions and so forth there. So Carla will be on tomorrow morning at 10. She kicks off the show tomorrow, and she's going to have a great a wealth of information, wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, Hugh. So Carla will be the girl for that one, but we can definitely hook up the website. I'll put a link to the website in the chat for you. Okay, so we've done that one. Jennifer Douglas again. Is the product label a requirement for the show? No labels on the bottles. I should let Jennifer answer that one. Sorry.
Okay, so this is a great question. So you can have a class for labels if you'd like. We usually call it a commercial class here, but you could, call it whatever you like. But it would showcase the company's labels, and sometimes that art and or design is taken into consideration for the class, as well as all the other criteria we discussed. But I'm glad you asked it, because in the slides that we showed, you saw some small white labels on the bottom of the jars, right? So those are the entry labels that you'll be given when you enter your honey, or any entry that you bring to the show. The show staff are going to have some of those white labels so that they can assign you a number and a way for them to record your entries in a book, so that when the judges are judging each entry, they have absolutely no idea, hi, this is Richard's honey, because his name is on the jar, So we have to have this discretion and anonymity, or we can't do a good job. If I am a judge of a honey show and I see art that I know the artist, or I know the photography, I excuse myself, even if it's a cake or a candle that I just know it came from this particular person. You would be surprised how many times you'll judge a particular show year after year, and you might even pick up a fragrance from somebody's beeswax and say, I am pretty certain I know who entered this, and I don't feel comfortable judging it because it's an unfair thing for me to do that. So just to answer the label question, there will be some labels that you'll have to place on your jars. I did it. Oh, Richard's not muted. I'll keep talking. So those labels go a ½ inch up from the bottom of the jar and centered as best as possible. And this is something the judge is going to look at. So if you can keep them straight, you can use a small piece of wood or a ruler to measure the height and get the levelness correct on those jar labels. But this is going to be something that you're going to do as the entrant when you're getting your entries ready. They're going to hand you, you're going to fill out a form, an entry form, hand it in, and then they're going to hand you back some labels, and you're going to go to the staging area and sit with your cloth and your gloves and your jar of water.
The video off.
You've got some earbuds in your ears, and you're listening to
Yeah, sorry, Jennifer, one other question. We've got David Small. He wants to become a honey judge.
great.
So I guess he has to come to Florida.
Yeah, at this time, everything is virtual for the Spring Bee College in March, and we didn't add the Honey Judge training to the March schedule. But David, don't despair. We'll take care of you. I'll contact Amy after today and let her know that you're interested, and I'll personally try to work on something that we can do with you from afar to get you prepared. And hopefully in the fall, we'll have something in person for anyone to attend if it's safe.
Okay, great. So I think we've answered all of the questions in that section. So I don't know if we want to take a break or we're gonna move on or what we're gonna do.
I think a short break. If anybody needs to, just grab a quick drink, use the restroom. Maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a quick 10-minute break, folks, and we'll resume in let's say it's 11:28 now. So let's resume at 11:40.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds
So
good.
good with that, everybody. So we're gonna take a quick break, guys, and we'll queue back up at 11:40. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Be right back.
Right. So back in
innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation, unleash community spirit, Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus in Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first
Still
national
have a good ways to go.
Yeah, pretty much. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so what do we do next?
So,
Okay, one thing I just want to mention to everybody, that I'm gonna try to, if you want to make a, to speak or make a, to ask a question, you can just go to, I'm gonna try and unmute you so that you can speak. So once I give you access to speak, all you have to do is unmute your microphone and speak, and you should be as good as gold. You should be able to communicate directly with Jennifer. So hopefully we're gonna try that. So let's try and make it as interactive as possible. I know I like hearing my own voice, but I don't like hearing my own voice that much. I see Lorraine Archibald has a hand up. I'm going to press the allow to talk button, Lorraine. So all you have to do now is unmute your mic and we should be able to hear you. Unmute your mic, Lorraine. Unmute your mic. No, Lauren doesn't want to unmute her mic. All right. Okay. I think Mr. Romulus may have better success. Let me try to find Mr. Giles Romulus, our great patron from Jeff SGP. Mr. Romulus, can you go ahead and unmute your microphone and speak? Can we hear you, sir?
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Ah, wonderful. It works. I wasn't a crazy guy after all. It does work.
Right. I want to compliment both of you. Wonderful presentations this morning, Jennifer. Really interesting. I'm not a bee person as such, but I understand bee more in terms of the ecology and what it does for the environment. I purchased some geographer's perspective and environmental planner. So for me, bee species are very, very important for the conservation of the biodiversity and so on. And I really want to say thanks on behalf of my organization for your contribution to this event. I think we are contributing to the knowledge, we're reducing the knowledge deficit here in the Caribbean in this important apiculture. And you're contributing to helping us to grow a new industry in a way that, in an unprecedented manner. So thank you very much. Well done, Richard, as usual. I'll be monitoring and listening and learning at the same time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Just one more point, Richard. All the persons on, I really would like them to be interactive, ask questions. Let's be as children. Let's ask questions so that we can make this interactive and so we can, get the maximum for it. Thank you very much. Keep up the great work.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Once again, so that's great contribution there from Mr. Romulus. Yes, there is going to be a recording, Frida Ferguson, and I will post the link to you shortly. Risha, what training in the region? What training what training in the region is there to become a beekeeper? I think from the last international seminar, such was mentioned. Okay, I'm going to digress a little bit. Please forgive me, Jennifer. From a regional perspective, we do have our regional apiculture project that'll be starting very, very soon. Trinidad is a participating country in this regional project. Trinidad, St. Kitts, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, and as I said before, Trinidad and Samoa in the South Pacific, one of the South Pacific islands. So seven countries in this project. I would suggest you get in contact with the Jeff SUP office in Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Shada Mahaber, and she'll be able to give you some more information as to what group she'll be working with in the beekeeping community in Trinidad and Tobago. And there'll be a lot of online training. We're doing a lot of online programs. Hopefully we'll be doing some collaboration with the University of the West Indies. We'll definitely be doing collaboration with the University of the West Indies and the Open Campus Arthur Lewis in St. Lucia. And hopefully I've spoken to the folks up at the University of Florida, and maybe there may be some collaboration at that level as well. So let's give it some time and let's see how we progress in that regards. But there is going to be a lot of information available for training within the Caribbean region in the coming, at least there's going to be a jam packed with training, and there'll be a lot of online packages that you could interact with, if you want to get your basic beekeeping level sorted out now, you could do that through some of the programs that we have running. And if you want to get more advanced, you can go to places like University of Florida, Cornell University in New York. They have fantastic online master beekeeping programs which are available for persons to participate in, as well as what we are producing out of the Caribbean, which you will be able to learn more about in the weeks and months coming. Hope that answers your question, Risha. Thank you. I'm having connection issues, but I don't want to miss. Shadal, Harry, I am very new to this, just want to learn about honey, so I'm interested in learning. Okay, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, so we want to kick things off again. Ready to go? Ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready.
All right.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, so bring up the next slide.
That would be wonderful.
Okay, so let's go back into share screen mode. Let's kick the next slide across. And let's go into share screen mode. All right. There you go. All yours, Jennifer.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind compliments, Dr. Romulus, and the organizations that are involved in this education. I have to commend you for everything that you do as a beekeeper and just as a person, the sustainability of everything we're doing and everybody, the value I place on life here and everywhere is great. And sharing this much information is a pleasure for me to do. I hope it is positively impacting your lives, and I hope to stay in touch with all of you and meet you and learn from you as well. But thank you for everything that you all do. So just to continue on, I know the extracted honey class is a big one, and that we put a lot of emphasis on preparing the entries, but it's not for naught. It's a very important class in honey shows all over the world. But I mentioned a few times to you, I forgot I had this slide in here, and I'm really happy to see it. It makes me smile. I hope it makes you smile. But this is the novice class. This is a show that I was able to participate in the US and California. The show is called the Heirloom Expo. It's put on by an organization called Baker Creek Seeds. And the seed company itself is well known for maintaining lines of heirloom foods that have been grown in our country and around the world for the history of humankind, where I think Richard and I have had a couple of great conversations developing some of this programming regarding how important I think it is that we stay in touch with recipes and foods from our region, our culture, our families. Sometimes it's lost, they say, on the youth. Our next generations aren't as interested in those foods. But here in Florida, we're learning to forage and find things that are easy, that grow well, that not only sustain us, but our bees and wildlife. And this show in particular is literally just table. You can see some of it behind me, table upon table upon table of a giant room full of heirloom fruits and vegetables that you won't see in the supermarkets, but they've been important to someone at some point in time. And the documentation of them, each of those squashes behind us have a placard with a name, and many of them are entered into competitions. So there's a competition regarding the food, but because there's such wonderful people and they have an interest in everything, they also invited us to come and have a honey competition. So what you're seeing there are some different entries that won awards, a couple of really nice people that I got to judge the honey with. And you'll notice that there are ribbons there. So that's the exciting and aspect of entering all of these competitions, is having the possibility of winning an award. This show was very lenient as far as the rules and regulations and strictness and entries. And it was done because the people entering are not familiar with the stuff that you and I are sharing with each other right now. And we wanted them to feel encouraged, positive, and walk away with a good feeling, and also award people some prizes. So there's different packaging there. So we weren't strict about the jars, the lids, the fill level, all the things we discussed earlier about extracted honey. And that's how I would recommend handling the novice class. So I wanted to include that slide and share a little bit about that experience that I had. And I hope you get excited about honey shows and find your way to other places in the world to visit and participate in honey shows outside of your area as you get going in this. Richard, would I?
Quick question. What's the name of the seed? I see somebody asked, what's the name of the seed company?
Baker Creek Seeds, Baker. Tremendous company. Unbelievable people. And then when it's easy for you, Richard, I'd love to see the next slide.
Of course. I'm sorry, 1,000 apologies.
Oh, not at all. Take your time.
No. Yeah, there you go. It's moved across there.
So our next category is the comb honey. And we have two classes in the show usually. Chunk comb in the jar so that would be a chunk of honeycomb in the jar with honey, and section. But look at that frame. Some of the honey shows also have a class where you enter an entire non-extracted frame of natural comb that the bees drew out. So what you would produce for honeycomb. And that is a class in and of itself. It's really, really hard to do. I don't know how comb honey production is for you where you live, but here in the US and the region that I live, it's more and more difficult for us to have the bees have enough resources to draw out excess wax and a place to store honey. And even the midsection of this frame would be all natural wax. And so again, that's a lot of resources. So comb honey is coveted and revered here now, and it's very minimally produced, except for some regions where there's crops that are produced in mass, like clover and alfalfa, which aren't necessarily my favorite crops because they're largely monocrops at this point in time. But small scale comb honey production has definitely become a more of a rarity here in the United States. But it's so important, and you can see this frame has got some plastic on it. I found this on Etsy, so I can tell that you could easily be producing something like this and get the best value of dollar for what you're producing, because it's really coveted. Customers, I don't know if you're selling honey already, you'll probably know that your customers are always asking you for comb honey. So we try to make sure we have a little bit, but it does sell out before we're able to produce more. The frame that you see is an example of a good frame of comb honey, but I want you to take note of the open cells on the right side of the frame, because in preparing an entry for the comb honey, whether it be the section or the chunk in the jar, I'm going to make sure and tell you that you want to avoid having any open cells at all. You want to find a frame more like the one above it, standing up behind it, that has very few empty cells along the right side edge. That one looks almost good enough. You can't see the whole entire frame, but I could tell you that if I saw that in a competition, I would give it a good look over and I'd be happy to judge it, but I might avoid or not even judge the one below it. unless it was a really lenient show and I was wanting to give good feedback to the entrant and make them feel encouraged. But, for a stricter show, those open cells would be something that might disqualify your entry. So that's the first thing I want to tell you is if you're going to go through the trouble of preparing the comb honey for show, you want to make, again, extra. So you're going to do the best you can to make as many frames as possible because you're going to pick your best sections and your best chunks. And when you prepare this, after you take it off of the bees, and one tip I'll give you is to use very little smoke when you remove these frames, because you don't want any of that smoke to become part of the aroma or flavor in this, or even your extracted honey. So be mindful when you're extracting honey, if you can, to use very little smoke to avoid getting any kind of soot or smoke smell in the comb or in the honey. That's detectable by the judge. And then when you remove this again, you want to keep it under a fan and keep it dry and prepare it as soon as possible. And in preparing this, there's quite a bit of effort to be made. So for section, there's usually a container listed in the rules, and most of the containers are pretty simple. They're rectangular in shape. They're usually plastic. They have a lid, and it's up to the show if they would like to do something different, but that's typical. Just a small, what we call like a clamshell container, usually holds about 10 to 12 ounce piece of comb with honey. And in order for you to prepare it, you simply need to find a rack like you would to put cookies on to cool, something like a wire rack. And you want to put this entire frame gently down on that and use a serrated knife and cut along the outside edge of each top bar, bottom bar, and side bars until you can remove the entire frame of comb out onto that wire rack. And then you're going to need to make a template that fits the section inside your container, because what you really are looking for here is for your section of honeycomb to fit the container almost entirely. So you want it to be very snug. You don't want it to have a lot of excess room around the outside. So the comb should really take up the entire space of the container. And you can make a template out of a simple piece of cardboard or paper. A stiff piece of paper is much better than a thin piece of paper. So you can take it, and I don't know if you've ever cut a piece of parchment paper to fit inside a cake pan, but it's not much different than that. You can rub the paper on the outside of the container to get an imprint, take a scissor and cut it until you get it to be the size that you feel is a good template for that container. And then you lay that on top of the honeycomb and you use a sharp knife, usually a serrated knife, not quite a giant bread or cheese knife, but something a little smaller like a steak knife. You can warm the blade gently, but don't get it too hot, because if you do, when you go to cut your comb, you may melt the wax, and the judge will see that line of melted wax where the cut was made, and that could easily disqualify you. So there's kind of a fine line between warming the knife blade and making the knife blade too hot. You can actually practice without warming the blade at all and see if the cut looks nice and crisp. What you're looking for is a really crisp cut line on the comb. And then again, you see the surface of this frame where all of the cells are already capped nicely. But I want you to look at the surface and note that some of it is white and looks dry. And then you'll notice one or two of the cells where the capping sunk and is actually sitting on top of the level of honey. So you see a little bit of a moisture coming through, visibly for that cell. Believe it or not, some honey shows are so particular in judging that if they see that one cell, it could be the difference between a first place for that particular section and the one right next to it that doesn't have any of those sunken cappings that sit on top of honey. Now, I know that's a lot to ask of you, but I'm just giving you all the information that you might need for a really strict show, and then encouraging the organization to be a little bit more understanding and lenient as people are learning, and that they would be more accepting of some of that. We have bees of all different kinds all over the world. Some of them, that's the way they store honey. Some store with a little air gap between the level of honey and the capping, and some don't. And depending on the actual nectar flow and season, and things that the bees are working with, this result can change drastically from one frame to the next. So it puts a very great level of difficulty on preparing this entry for a honey show. All of these different things that you have to be aware of and particular about in preparing it. The good news is people want honeycomb so much that even the things you're practicing on that don't quite make it, you could easily put in a clamshell and sell to your consumer, and they're going to be thrilled to be able to purchase it. And if you work hard at it, you'll probably find a piece that's suitable for the judge to look at. And if not, don't be deterred. Try again the next season that you have a good nectar flow. So you've got the frame and you're looking at it carefully and trying to find the best absolute section. Maybe practice cutting with your template a different area of the frame first, so you get a familiarization with how the knife is going to cut through the wax, and take a little care to do that, so that when you're ready to cut that perfect piece, you don't have an accident cutting it because you hadn't practiced yet. That's another tip that I like to share. So you're going to make one or two pieces first just for practice. And again, your customers are going to be thrilled to purchase them. And then when you're good and ready, take a deep breath and cut the piece that you want for your section container for your show and place it on the wire rack and let it drain, at least for a day. You want to keep this in an area that's not likely to absorb anything from the air in the way of moisture, dust, dirt, or debris. Because believe you me, if there is a piece of hair or a piece of dust or a piece of lint or something that could possibly find its way to that honey comb, it's going to find its way. So try to find a nice area that you can put this where it's dry and cool, cool enough to keep and dry enough to keep your honey from absorbing moisture in the air and getting any extra moisture added. Because even though it's capped, as we know as beekeepers, there is a certain level of permeability to the cappings. So it could absorb moisture. Plus our eyes are, unless you're using a really fine scope, there may be a puncture here or there that you're not aware of. So do take great care once you cut the section and place it someplace to rest. Let all the liquid honey from the areas where you opened the comb drain completely. So when you go to place this section in your container, no honey will come out of that section and drip into the plastic. So when you place the entry in the show, your judge is going to pick it up and it's not going to have any puddle of honey underneath the section. It'll be nice and dry inside the box. So that is pretty much the main objective of preparing the section for a honey show. And I'm going to move right into preparing the chunk comb in a jar. And then we can take a minute or two for questions, because I know there's going to be some. So to prepare the chunk comb for the jar, in the rules, there's going to be a container or jar required. And the jar usually has a wide mouth opening and is straight-sided. So it's not like some of our honey jars where you saw earlier that the neck was much smaller than the sides of the jar. We're talking about a jelly jar or a mayo jar or a salsa jar or something that's a straight-sided jar. And the section that you're going to put in there, the chunk, needs to be exactly the width of the center of the jar. And I can show you that after I talk about it for a minute. So I'll talk for a minute and then I'll ask Richard kindly to give me the video. But let me just talk for just a couple minutes more about it. So again, you take a piece of cardboard or thick paper, and the circle of the top of your jar has a middle, and the middle is the width of the jar. That's the measurement you're going to want to make with your template. And then the second measurement is the height of the jar. So you're going to want to measure from the bottom inside of your jar all the way up to that ridge that I showed you on the honey jar that I filled earlier. That's the fill level for your honey, but it's also the height of your section of comb that you're going to cut for this jar. You want that piece of comb to take up at least 50% of the jar. That's one of the requirements for most of the honey shows, that your chunk of honeycomb takes up at least 50%. So the entire width of the jar, the entire height of the jar, up to the fill line. By now, you're probably thinking that that piece of comb is going to float around in the honey once you fill it. Well, it could, but based on the size that you're using, it won't get squished by the lid when you close it. And here's the other tip. You're going to prepare this chunk the same way you did the section. You're going to cut a few first for practice on the frame where you see something that isn't as pretty as the piece that you want to cut for the jar. And you're going to finally get to the point where you're ready to cut the one for the jar. And you're going to cut it and you're going to let it drain on the wire rack for a day till no more honey is dripping out, just like you did for the section. And then when you're ready, you're going to pick it up carefully and place it inside the jar. Now it's a snug fit because you've used the entire width of the center of the jar, the diameter from left to right of the circle. And so you're going to likely, it's like playing the game of Operation. If you've ever played the board game Operation, you have to use a little tweezer and try to reach in this teeny little circle hole to pick up something. And if you touch the outside edge, you're going to hear a loud buzzer go off. Well, you're going to be as careful as possible to place this piece of comb into the jar without touching the sides. If you touch the sides, you're likely going to get some wax and honey on the inside. That the honey is not so hard to clean off, but the wax, that's not so easy to clean off. So it's a careful and delicate balance between having the section cut just precisely to fit, not too big where it really touches the sides when you place it in, and not too small that there's a lot of room in between the sides of the jar. So this is going to take a good deal of practice, and I'm going to wager that you might make several of them before you get it just right. And that's okay.
Do you want me to switch the video now?
Sure. So here we have the type of jar that I was describing to you. It's a straight-sided jar. In the US, this is a 16-ounce jar. It actually is a 12-ounce jar by weight, but it holds 16 ounces of honey by weight. So by volume, this is a 12-ounce jar for canning purposes. But as you know, honey doesn't weigh the same. So we always have to have a little bit of math skills in figuring out what our jars need to be. So it does have a very wide mouth opening. So this is by no means a perfect example of what you would do for a honey show, but it is a good example that we can handle and show each other some of the things that you might do. After this is carefully measured and you want to place it in the jar, again, it's going to just barely fit. So you're going to have to be very, very careful as you're placing it down on the inside of the jar. And if you go to place it and it's just too snug, don't push it. Take it out and give it another trim, just a hairline trim on the side, if you can, carefully, just to make it go in easier so you can avoid having that difficulty of having it touch the sides of the jar. I talked a little bit about what you're going to pick as far as the surface and the way that the cappings look. But there's another thing that I didn't get a chance to talk about yet with both the section and the chunk, and that's the midline. So I don't know how well you can see this, but I think it's pretty visible that the midline of this is just really off. The cells on one side are completely longer in length than the ones on the other side. And the judge would be so thrilled if you picked the piece of comb that had the midline in the center and the cells were equidistant on the right and the left. That's going to give you a much better score, both in your section and your chunk comb. So when I said this was difficult, I wasn't kidding. This is a really, really difficult one to do. We talked about 50% or more of the comb going into the jar. And then we talked about how it might float a little bit. To prevent it from floating, there's two things you can do. You can place the jar on a pan briefly and bring the pan onto a stove and turn the heat on. And what you're going to do is just heat the jar up very slightly. So I'm talking a very low amount of heat. And the bottom of the jar should be warm, but not hot. It's just like we spoke about earlier with using the sharp knife to cut the comb. You want the knife blade to be warm enough to help you make the cut, but not so hot that the wax starts to melt when it touches. So when you go to place this piece of comb in the jar and it's warm, it's going to adhere to the bottom of the jar, but not melt and stick there by way of liquid wax. So it's just warm enough to touch and hold, but not warm enough to melt. From there, you have another important task. You need to fill the jar properly, like we did with the extracted honey earlier, and you need to use the same honey that's in the section comb and in the chunk comb. So you want a matching honey, always. So it's important that you use the same exact honey that you have in this comb, and it could be from a crush and strain or an extracted frame, but just be careful to make sure you use the same, because if the judge notices a different color between the two honeys or moisture content or anything, he may take out your chunk and perforate a cell with his or her tasting rod and taste the honey and check the moisture. So you don't want to raise any flags. You want to make the honey match in all respects. Excuse me for one brief second. Okay, so now that same thing applies to the chunk comb in a jar with the lids. Whatever lid that you use, please make sure it's clean and doesn't have a scratch and doesn't have a safety seal on it. And fill the jar to the same level that you filled your extracted honey to. And also, you want to prepare the honey in the same exact way. You don't want to see any debris in your chunk or section comb. So you want to hold a flashlight up to it before you decide which piece you're going to use and enter. And you want to look for any soot or debris from the hive or anything that's dark in color. You want to see clean wax, clean honey. There may be an occasional bubble. That's understandable. But after you fill this jar, leave the lid slightly loose so that those bubbles can raise to the surface. And then adjust your fill level properly before closing the lid tightly to bring it to the show. Prepare it exactly as you did the other jars. Shine it, polish it, pick your best glass, pick your best lids, and pick your best containers. All of those things are going to help you make sure that your entry is the best one on the show bench. I'd love to take a minute or two for questions on this because I know that's a lot of information.
Okay, I'm going to try to unmute person's mics so we can get to hear their voices and they can ask their question themselves. So Risha Allen, you can unmute your mic and you can ask your question directly. So go ahead.
Hi, morning all, or good afternoon. I was wondering what you meant by floating. Is it really just a matter of not moving, having the comb stand upright in the jar?
Yes, absolutely. So when the comb is inserted in the jar and then you add honey, if the comb doesn't take up the majority of the jar or it's not sort of sitting down on the bottom, like I mentioned, when you warm the jar, there is a possibility that it might float off the bottom of the jar. So when the judge opens it, part of the comb would be sticking out above the surface of the honey where you filled it to. And you don't want that for a honey show. You would like to see the comb sitting below the level, just below the level of the honey that you filled it to and not floating. So when the judge looks at the jar, they will see that that comb is seated all the way at the bottom of the jar. So there isn't like a half inch or an inch of honey before the comb starts. They want to see it all the way from the top to the bottom.
Okay, so does that answer your question, Risha?
Yes, I just had another quick question, if possible.
Sure, go ahead.
When Jennifer, you were talking about the equidistance of the comb. I mean, how is that possible? The example you showed, one side was equidistant to each other, but they were larger than the ones on the other side.
It's a very difficult task. I mean, the biggest aspect of our contribution is to seat, say, 100% thin foundation in the middle of a wooden frame. And that's the best we can give to the bees to give them an opportunity to work from the center outwards. But at the end of the day, the bees will definitely do different things. So then the beekeeper, when they go in the hive, they have to sort through these frames and try to find the ones where the bees were fairly regular as far as the depth of each cell on both sides. One thing you have a little bit control of, other than the thin foundation or letting the bees use natural, is the spacing of the frames. Some beekeepers that use wooden boxes that hold a certain number of frames, in the case of like a Langstroth frame, and it really doesn't matter. It's just an example. It could be a piece of wood or whatever you're using. It doesn't matter. But the size of the box or the cavity where the frames go and the normal spacing that a beekeeper would use for bee space, sometimes a beekeeper producing this type of comb will put one less frame in the box and put a little extra space in between each frame. in order for the bees to draw that cell a little larger on both sides of the midsection. And that will extend it all the way to the edge of the top bar, and make a nice full frame for like the frame I showed you in the slide. It doesn't necessarily always apply, but it is a technique that you can practice with and see if it helps. There's a lot more to it, of course. The box of frames going on the bees when the nectar flow has already started and is in full effect, at least 10% or more seems to be helpful. I've had other beekeepers tell me to make sure that there's adequate nurse bees and young bees, and the population is extremely high, and even to restrict the queen way down away from the honey super, and not having her lay eggs for a few days or a week or longer. There's so many techniques to doing this type of comb honey that even myself, I haven't had a chance to try, but I'm always interested in learning more about it. But I hope some of that's helpful.
Okay, so we can push on. Stephen Slater. When preparing. Okay, Stephen, I'm gonna unmute you so you can ask your question yourself, sir. Let's use the technology. So you're unmuted, Stephen. Just go ahead.
Hi, Jennifer.
Stephanie. Sorry, Stephanie. Sorry.
That's
Stephanie.
okay. That's
My
okay.
apologies.
Stephen was my dad. That's okay, Richard.
All right. Okay.
Hey, Jennifer, my county honey show has just added a full frame of honey class. And so this year would be the first year I would enter. My question is, for the full frame, should thin surplus be used, or is it acceptable to have wired wax foundation for the full frame class?
That's a really great question. Thank you so much for asking. It really depends on the show, and typically the wired foundation is not acceptable. Usually the judge would like to see a full frame without wiring. So the thin surplus would be the best way to go for that.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much.
Of course. Yes. Good luck.
Yes. Yes.
Let us know, please.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we don't have any more questions for now, so we can push ahead and with our presentation. So
awesome.
Should we go back to our share screen?
That'd be wonderful. We're going to talk about wax next.
Yep. If the slide will move. Okay, beeswax. There you go.
So just a quick bit about beeswax, and then I'll show you a few things that I have here for you. Some of the classes in honey shows for beeswax are beeswax blocks and candles, and also beauty products, which I think all three classes are being considered for this show that's developing for December. The beeswax block, if you could go to the next slide for me, Richard, please. This is a really beautiful photo. Our friend in Northern Ireland has a show for the INIB, and is also one of the judges that brought the type of judging we're discussing to America and to the University of Florida. And I don't know if you can see the detail that has gone into these entries, but it really takes me back a little to think about how much time and effort has been given to just taking some beeswax that we produce from our bees and make it into a cake that is basically flawless in its shape, uniformity, color. And if you shine a flashlight through that cake of wax, you'll see nothing but the same texture throughout, no streaking, no bubbles, no sediment. The color of wax in the UK and in Europe for this particular class is usually like a creamy, canary yellow color. But in the US and maybe where you are, you might have some other types of waxes developed from your bees. We tend to have some darker waxes here, some real gold and yellow and orange waxes. The aroma can vary greatly. Some of the waxes that I've smelled from Europe and other parts of where I live in the US have a lot of, I say propolis. I don't know if you say propolis, but I'm just going to say it my way and we can chuckle about it together. But some of these waxes have the most amazing scent of propolis. But where I live, we don't really have the type of trees that the bees collect a lot of sap and produce propolis here. And also the types of bees genetically that we have are typically not heavy propolis collectors. But I do enjoy smelling wax that has that. And I'd love to hear from you about your wax someday. Making a cake of wax, again, you follow the rules that are set forth for the show. Usually there's a specified weight to how much wax is going to be in your cake, and it's not an exact weight. So the good news is you have a range. So that gives you a little bit of forgiveness in whether or not it's exact or not. It might say between 1.5 and 2 pounds. So you'll take a nice little scale and measure your wax before you prepare it. And we can go into preparing wax just a little bit, but I'm not going to go in too great of detail because I think most of you probably have done this before, but if you haven't, we can discuss it. But basically the cappings wax, again, just like we shared earlier for your honey, for your extracted classes, you can then reserve the same cappings that you used. And I don't use a water method for melting my cappings. I use a double boiler. So I take one larger pot that I don't care about because it's going to get completely full of wax and never be used again for cooking. So you might want to find just like an inexpensive pot that you don't care too much about. And then another pot that fits inside it, not too tightly because you're going to put some water in the bigger pot and then you're going to nest the second pot inside. And that's where you're going to put your cappings. And you want to use a good amount of heat to get the water hot. But then you want to turn it down when it starts to come to a simmer or a boil because wax is flammable at a certain temperature, around 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I've never had a concern or a fire, but I always like to exercise a little caution and teach with a little bit of caution and share with a little caution. So please be mindful of having a double boiler set up and on the stove or on the fire, that you don't step away from it for too long and keep a real good watch on it, because it could become an issue if you're not tending it carefully. So it is flammable. So you get the double boiler going and you have your cappings in there, and hopefully you've drained your cappings as good as possible. If you want to spread them out in on a piece of cloth or something for a little while, the bees are happy with foraging on something else, so it won't get them too excited. You can do that and have them outside just to get a little drier. But there is a chance there will be a pretty good amount of honey in these cappings. So your first time melting them and everything becomes liquid in your pot, right? You're going to have to strain it into something. So you'll have a second container. It could be, sometimes I'll use like a container that I bought that had juice in it. But again, be mindful because if the plastic is too soft, it could melt when you pour this hot honey and wax in. So there is a denser plastic. It's the kind that we use to get water in. If you go to purchase water at a machine that's filtered, it's the PET quality plastic. It's a real durable plastic, usually can handle that, but you want to pass it through a filter. Again, I'm going to go back to the t-shirt that you didn't want to wear and you saved and you started cutting up. By now, you're probably into your second t-shirt or somebody else's t-shirt that they didn't want. And you can drape that across the second container and pour the wax and honey through to trap any debris or filter out any particulate. And you're going to let that cool. If you can't come across a container that you find will be safe or suitable, you can use, there's a soft, I'm trying to think of the word for it, silicone, like a silicone bowl. I've been using those a lot. They're real popular now for baking and all. You can actually bake in a silicone. Some of them are rated for heat. So those are real handy to pour your filtered wax into, and you're going to allow it to cool. And what will happen is the honey will be on the bottom, liquid, a little dark in color because you've put a pretty good deal of heat on it, and you may use it for baking, but you may decide not to use it at all for consumption. And then your wax cake will be above it. So after it cools, you'll have this beautiful filtered block of wax that you can rinse off the honey, let it dry. And if you have the weight that you need, again, I would recommend preparing a little extra. You can go ahead and prepare your wax block. So the type of pan that you would use is the same kind of pan that you would use to bake a cake. It's just a round pan. Usually the weight and the depth of the block is going to be noted in the rules. So it will say, for example, 1.5 to 2 pounds is required, between 1 and 2 inches of depth. So I have just a simple cake pan here to show you, and you may have to experiment a little bit with these pans to find one that is the right diameter to hold the volume of wax that you're going to be trying to make a cake out of. So there is a bit of skill there. And the other thing, you probably can't see it too easy, but this pan has already been used once for baking, and somebody decided to use a knife inside of it to cut the cake or whatever was in it. So it has a couple of those scratches already in it. I wouldn't recommend using this pan for your wax block. I would go ahead and buy or try to find a new pan that doesn't have that issue, so that when you pour this, the surface is extremely perfect. You're going to want to have a place set up in your kitchen or an area where it's nice and quiet, probably towards the evening when you're about to retire for the night. And you've got your wax your cake that's already been cooled, you've rinsed off the honey and you've dried it. Now you're going to go ahead and melt it a second time. Use gentle heat each time because you want to retain all the delicious aromas and fragrances from this wax. And so slowly melt this wax. And when it's liquid, you're going to pour it into this pan. I recommend setting the pan someplace where you know it's level, a level surface. And if you have an actual level, you can set that device in front of the pan and make sure it's exactly the levelness it needs to be. And the stream of which you pour your wax in, how fast, how slow, is going to affect how the wax also sets in that pan. As far as keeping the wax from sticking to the pan, that's a whole nother trick. I've had people share with me all kinds of tips over the years. I've tried dish soap, just a very thin layer of dish soap rubbed gently around the inside of the pan. Some people will actually use a spray that is made and sold for the purpose of keeping wax from sticking to the candle molds that they use. That silicone spray is okay, but it does leave sometimes a little bit of a film on the outside. But you can try either or both of those. You can also try nothing and then putting the pan in the area that you want it to rest for the evening, because you know nobody's going to be walking through the kitchen and making bumps and disturbing your wax, because as it cools, you want it to cool slowly and without disturbance. So you might chuckle at this too. You could kind of give it, like, tuck it in, give it like a little blanket or a little insulation around it so that it cools slowly. The quicker the wax cools, the more likely it may show some cracks or ripples or texture in the cake itself. So again, this is one of the more tricky things to do. And I've seen a lot of wax cakes in the shows over the years. So I'm going to encourage you to practice. I'm going to encourage the show committee to be very forgiving and understanding as people are doing this and learning for the first time, and award prizes even to some that have flaws. But keep at it, because there's some really great entries to be made out of wax, including the candle entries, which we're going to talk about next. But try to let your wax cake cool. And when it is cool all the way, if you haven't prepped your pan with any kind of silicone spray or soap, you could put it in the refrigerator or freezer just for a short period of time. And at that point, when you take it out, you could give it a good little tap, and it should dislodge itself from the pan and come out easily. And don't say any bad curse words or get upset or frustrated if it doesn't work out the first time, because you may have to practice it several times until you get it just right. I have been through that and I still keep trying, so don't give up. If there's no questions, I can take a second for questions on this before we go to the candles, Richard, if you want.
I learned something new myself today, because I make a lot of wax. We produce a lot of wax, and I saw this, I've seen this picture before on the internet, and I always marveled at how did they get the wax almost identical and so beautiful. But then I saw you pull out your nice little baking pan, and I said, God, I should have thought of that. But it's really nice, very, very nice, very pretty, very pretty, very, very pretty. There was just one question I saw. I saw somebody asked, I answered them, but you can't use plastic, no use of plastic foundation in you're doing the honey on comb. You can't use plastic foundation.
No, sorry, 100% wax for that, and either the bees doing it or you introducing the thin surplus foundation to the bees.
Yeah,
is the way to go.
Who else? I've got somebody's got their hand up. Let me see whose hand is up. Okay, Emily. Oh no, Emily put her hand down. That's not fair, Emily. You put your hand down before I could unmute your mic. Anybody got any questions? Okay, Jamila, repeat from after you reheat. Okay, Jamila asked, can you repeat from after where you reheat the wax and the honey mix, please?
Sure. So the first time you're going to take the cappings into the two pots. One pot is larger with water in it, and the other pot is smaller. The cappings go in, and you bring that hot water to a boil, turn it down to a very low simmer, and slowly and carefully and stay attend it. You're going to let that all become liquid. Then you're going to have a second container where you have the filter, like the t-shirt material, and it could be a silicone bowl or an adequate piece of plastic, or even another pot if you wish. And you're going to pour all of that liquid in, and you're going to end up letting that cool to the temperature where the wax cake is hard and the honey is liquid underneath. So you're going to remove the wax cake and wash it, all the honey off of it, and let it dry. And then when you're ready to pour your wax cake, you've got your pan ready, your level ready. It's nighttime, you're going to bed, you're in a really good mood, everything's going great. You're going to take that cake of wax and you're going to bring it to a liquid state again. Again, slowly. You don't want to overcook it. It'll lose all of its scent, have a darker, more burnt smell to it. You want it to be amazing. And you're choosing wax that smells really good from the beginning. So it's just like your honey. You want to choose your best, really light colored, yellow, fragrant, delicious, no smoke, no other off chemicals wax. So you melt that slowly. And then if you feel like you want to filter it again, you can. Okay, this is up to you. You have the opportunity to filter this wax until you feel like it has no sediment left in it. So, but I usually can do it in one pass. So you get it liquid and you're ready to pour it in your pan carefully, not quite super fast. So the stream should be steady and in an area that's not being disturbed, so that it's level, and then you can let it cool slowly. Sometimes I'll put a little towel or blankie or something around it. And then even the oven is a great place to put it for the night, because you close the door. It's free from everything in the room that could be a fan blowing or hair or dust or something just might get in there. So the oven is nice and it cools slowly in there because it's sort of an insulated area. Hopefully that helps.
Suzette Walters has a question. I'm gonna unmute. Suzette, can you unmute your mic and ask your question, please? Suzette, unmute your mic and ask your question.
Good. Yes, good morning. I have Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, good. It's morning here. Good morning. She said that to get the wax out, we could use a little dish soap to sort of coat the pan. Wouldn't that leave a smell in the wax?
Usually, if you use something that doesn't have a scent, it's okay. And at this stage, after the wax is removed, you will have the opportunity to clean it. If you need to, you can rinse it and let it dry. And then you can even polish it a little bit with a cloth, like a nylon cloth, or I want to say a handkerchief, like a satin handkerchief. So if you see that your wax is a little bit dull looking, you can give it a little shine. But that little film of dish soap can come off pretty easy from just a little rinse.
All right, Suzette, I hope that answers your question. Any more questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great stuff. Okay.
Yes, yes, that did it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so let's push on. Let's push on.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
let's
getting
talk
late.
about candles.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, where is my screen? Let's reshare the screen. All right, so yours.
Great, thank you so much. So candles is another really popular class in honey shows. And I don't know how many of you are already making candles, but it's something I really enjoy doing. I know Richard said he also produces a lot of wax. And, at some point you've got to have something to do with all of this wax, right? We are lucky enough to have a lot of people in the area that produce beauty products. And so they will purchase some of our wax from us. Also people who make their own candles and soaps and things like that. So we have an outlet for moving some volume of wax, but I personally love making candles. So I make a good deal of them regularly. So there's all sorts of molds out there, both simple and ornate and complex with detail. And there's usually a few classes available in different honey shows. One of them is decorative candles. So the ones that have decoration, and then there's the rolled candles. So this is the thin surplus foundation where you actually just roll the candle with the foundation. And then there's tapered candles, which are usually dipped candles. And those are a great deal of skill, I think, to make those. If some of you are out there that already are proficient at making them, maybe you could come visit me and help me learn how to make them, because I love them. But I've usually just been using the molds for the taper candles because they're so difficult to do and time consuming. But these are really great things to do with your beeswax. The molds you can find are made with silicone. You can get them from a lot of the beekeeping supply companies, or maybe you'd like to find something that you like that's a statue or something you enjoy from your personality or your what you enjoy to do in your life, and you might like somebody to make a mold for you out of that. And you can probably find somebody that can help you do that with some rubber or silicone that you purchase from like the hardware store. And you could even use something from the kitchen, like a can. So really it could be very simple, but the idea behind it is very similar to making the honey entries. If you're going to have a candle class in the honey show, there's usually a requirement on having 3 candles. In the case of the tapered candles, it's a pair of 2 or 2 pairs of 2. And this is increasing the difficulty because each candle needs to be exactly the same. So one of the first tips I'll give you is, again, choose your best wax. Your cappings wax is usually your best wax. And we just talked a pretty good amount about getting it prepared for making your beeswax blocks. So you'll be using the same technique if you're doing that. I should mention too, with honey shows, most of the requirements for honey shows is that the beekeeper produce the wax or the honey that they're entering in the show. And that's a pretty common requirement. It's up to the organization if they'd like to do that. Sometimes you'll find that is pretty common, but with art and photography and baked goods and even mead, you'll allow your entrants to purchase honey to make those items. So they don't necessarily have to have their own bees or be a beekeeper. Again, this is up to the organization, but I just want to share a little bit about that with you. When you're making candles with a candle mold, the difficulty in making a triplicate of exact matching candles is that one mold may be different from another. So my next tip is not to think about having 3 or 4 molds of the same thing, because ideally, if you're going to make these candles, you're going to have to use that same mold over and over again and make about 6 or 7 candles until you get 3 that seem exactly the same. You may think that if you purchase more than one mold of the same decoration, it may be exactly the same, but it could just be that one little thing that's off about it that would make it so your candles wouldn't win a first place. The other thing that you have control over is weighing the wax. So you can decide how much wax fits in the mold. The molds that I purchased from one of our distributors actually tells us in ounces how much wax fits inside the candle mold. And they even go so far as to tell us a suggestion of what type of wick to use, since the wicking is important too, because if we don't choose the proper wicking or have it prepared in the candle mold right, the candle won't burn correctly. And the judges aren't just looking for the decoration on the candles, the color of the wax, the aroma, and the fact that they're all poured exactly the same. They're going to actually light one of your candles and test burn it and make sure that it burns properly. So you'll have to perform this kind of test burn yourself on your candles. So you're going to be busy making a lot of candles in order to get ready for this honey show. And the reason that you do this is because when you sell candles to the consumer, you want to give them something they're going to enjoy and is going to burn properly, and the flame isn't going to go out or be too big and too hot. And you want them to come back and buy candles from you over and over again, because not only did they enjoy the color and fragrance and decoration of your candle, but it burned for a long time. And they felt like they got a good value from the purchase. So that's why those requirements are set forth by the show organization, so that you can have something that you can then sell to the consumer that's of great value. So those are some of the things that you really need to be mindful of. And now, if Richard, you would give me the screen for a minute.
Look, I'll share the screen. Stop share. Okay.
So this is just an example of one candle mold that I use here, and the actual wick that is in it. And what I've noted on the outside in marker, I know it's backwards to you because of the way that the screen is, you're seeing it backwards, correct?
Yes.
It's showing the actual wick number and how much volume of wax fits inside. So I use a marker to put that on my candle molds so that I don't have to do too much investigation before I pour some candles if I'm making a decision based on the show and even how much wax I have on hand. Because depending on the time of year, these items are very valuable and sometimes scarce. So it comes to winter and we don't have as much honey or we don't have as much wax to work with. So we have to think, am I going to make 3 giant candles, or maybe I'm going to make some smaller candles because that's what I have available right now. So that's another tip. Now, when you're pouring these candles, it's very similar to making the beeswax block. You might want to do it in the evening. You might want to have a surface area that's level where you know it's very flat. And you can use a couple of very simple tools. This is something I wish I had available all the time, but this is just a simple clothespin. You can see wax all over it, but I don't have a clothesline for hanging my clothes right now, and I should, because it's such a difficult thing to use an electric dryer to heat all the clothes, especially living in a place where there's so much sunshine. But this is just a simple tool that you can use. And then this is just a pair of chopsticks or bamboo or wood skewers. And that's what I use when I make candles. So I have my mold set somewhere level and free from a draft and disturbance. And I set the wood sticks on top. And then I use the clothespin to hold the wick on top. These raise up the sides of the mold so that when you go to pour the wax in and you hold the wick up with the clothespin, it doesn't sit in the wax. And if you pour the wax too high in the mold, it'll run out. So be careful as you're pouring. And if you pour it too low, it might not have a good bottom on it. So try to fill the cavity of the mold, because the wax will shrink a little bit as it's cooling. And you want to have a nice even candle when you take it out. And here's an example of a candle that has an awful bottom. So just so you can see what you don't want to have happen, you want it to be smooth and flat, a lot like the bottom of this candle, which is a tapered candle. The wick is in the center and the bottom of the candle is flush and clean and flat. And when you stand it up, it sits, it doesn't wobble around very much. So that's part of the technique of making all of these different candles. And then the wick itself, when you go to cut the wick, try to make a measurement of about 1/2 inch of height of wick above the candle before you cut it. And then in order to present it to the judge, give the wick just a little bit of a bend like this. This is going to make it easy for your customer or your judge to light the wick. okay? And then you're gonna do a test burn like we talked about before, at least an hour. You wanna light your candle and let it burn for an hour and watch that the flame doesn't go out. And you wanna watch that the flame is a good height, not too big, not too small, and that the wax is starting to melt down evenly. And when you're ready to extinguish your wick, just put your hand in front of the flame and blow a little bit around it, and it will go out nicely. The other thing you can do is take this stick and push the flame into the liquid wax and then stand it back up right away. And then your wick will have wax on it for the next time you need to burn it. So that's how you would pour your candles, test your candles. And then one other tip about tapered candles, if you're gonna make them, when choosing them, you wanna roll them on a flat surface and make sure that they roll not wobbly, okay? So you can take your best of all of your tapered candles to the show. But that's one other trick that I like to share with people about candles. Any questions about candles?
Yeah, Jamila Francis has a question again. I'm gonna unmute Jamila so she can ask a question. Hi, Jamila, you can, if you unmute your mic, you can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jamila.
Okay, so the tiny mold, the beeswax mold, do you
Yes.
put a hole at the bottom to pull the wick through?
Yeah, there's a hole here in the center. And some candle companies that sell these molds, the hole is already there, and some it's not, and you have to make it yourself with something sharp like a needle. I sometimes will use like a paper clip because I can bend the end of the paper clip and use it like a needle. I can put the wick through, and then you have to find the center as best as you can, and then push it through. Always put extra wick in there. It'll make it so much easier to make multiple candles. If you use a couple feet or a couple yards of wicking, you know, it's a good tip. And then some of the molds have a slice in them, so it's easy to get the candle out after you make it. Some of them don't, and you have to sort of push the candle out with your finger. And then if they have this slice, you need the rubber band. Otherwise, the candle wax will leak out all over the place. Work in an area that has a lot of cardboard laid out on the counter or paper bags on the counter or something, because you're once you start working in your area with wax, you're going to either need to redo your entire kitchen. You can ask my husband about this. There's no place in my kitchen that there isn't wax. It's a good thing. It's nice for furniture polish and everything because we have a lot of wax everywhere now. But do take great care because the wax is very hot, not to burn yourself. You know, be near an area where there's some cold running water in case you get a little hot wax on yourself. So take great care. Again, be in a good mood, calm, have all your supplies ready to make your candles, and make as many extra as you possibly can so that you can pick your best candles.
Cool, thank you.
Good. So to answer your question, Jamila?
Awesome, yes, it did.
Great stuff, great stuff. Okay, you want to push on, Jennifer?
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about beauty products, and then if you want to take a short break after that, we can. I don't know if I shared a photo of beauty products, but we can go to the next slide.
Next slide is the cakes. It's the cakes.
Okay, so let me just grab a jar of some cream that no, it's fine. I'm gonna grab a quick jar of cream to show you.
Sorry, the next slide is dry mead. The mead is the next, your favorite, mead. Mead is the next slide.
So I just stepped away to grab two beauty products to show you. Should you like to have this class, I've got a bar of soap that I made here and a jar of cream, and it's just a hand and body cream. And in the beeswax class, if you're going to do the beauty products, you would use beeswax as the ingredient in one of the beauty product that you produce. So it could be anything from a lip balm or a lotion or a bar of soap to a salve or a perfume balm or something. There's a lot of possibilities out there. Just be sure that you follow the rules and have some of your wax or wax and honey incorporated into the recipe. And if you have any questions about any of that, we can talk about it. It's a nice class because the organization could make it so that you purchase the beeswax. So it opens it up to more people that can participate. It's also a nice class because it's creative, and a lot of us like to do fun things with the products from the bees. So it really can showcase some interesting things. Maybe you're creating something nobody's ever done. That's always exciting. So that's a little bit about that class. But yeah, we can move right on to meat if you like.
I think that's the next slide, but I just have one question on the cosmetics products. Is there a specific percentage value of honey or wax that needs to be included in the product?
Not usually, unless there's a recipe that everybody's following uniformly, which is the case with the cakes, the honey cakes. Not usually. It's just a matter of saying that there is some beeswax or honey or both in the recipe. And the recipe is usually provided on an index card or a piece of paper with the process. So you would write up the recipe, and then you would write up the process of how you made the soap or made the cream. And then you would provide the example for the judges to actually sample or try themselves.
We have a question. Okay, I got two questions. Let's see if we can get Clive. Let's see if I can find Clive Dieterville to ask his question. Clive, could you unmute your mic and ask your question, please, sir? Clive, unmute and ask your question, Clive.
Hi, good morning. It's actually his
Hi.
wife.
Okay.
My question is, what about the scented candles? How do you add scents to the candles? Thank you.
Sure. So usually with this type of honey show, the candles are not scented unless they're being entered into a different type of class, like art or photography. There's like a class that doesn't have any stricter requirements. Just the straight wax classes, judges are usually looking for the wax to be natural, just the way you got it from the bees, no scenting.
Thank you.
Of course. My pleasure.
Hope that answers your question. All right. We have another question. We have another question from Gupret Singh. Let me try and find. Okay. Gupret Singh, if that's the correct pronunciation, can you unmute your mic and ask your question, please? Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, Gupret.
Yes, sir. My question are what are the cotton thread this thread used for burning?
Can you repeat that? Your signal is not so good. Could you repeat your question, please?
What cotton thread does this thread use for burning?
I still didn't quite catch you, sir. Could you repeat, please?
Cotton or not cotton use?
What I just got the last word, use. That's all I could hear.
What cotton thread does this thread use for burning? For candle question, sir.
Candle question. What cotton thread do you use? What thread do you use for the candle?
Yes,
So
yes.
wonderful. That's a wonderful question. Thank you so much. So there are a lot of options out there for using different types of wicking. Cotton wicking is a very good and very common style of wick that you can get from a beekeeping supply company or a candle supply company. We don't usually use anything that has any nylon or metal like lead added, because those are sometimes choices that are available. Cotton ply wicking, either braided wicking, there's round and flat braided wicking. I usually test my candles with the type of wicking that is recommended. There's a chart you can look up online for the wicking for the size of the diameter of the candle and the style of the candle. So you might find a chart that says for 1/2 inch to 1 inch taper candle, use a number 4 wick. So there are all these different numbers associated with the wicks. The one that I just showed you for the cavity for the mold that I was showing you has a flat braided cotton wick, and the name of it is 60 ply. So it's a interesting name. It's not as common as some of the other numbers that we use. Some of the other common ones I use for the smaller candles are 2/0 and 4/0. Those are some very common wick numbers that you can find that are made of cotton that work very good for some smaller candles that are usually about 2 inches tall and 1 or 2 inches in diameter. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you much for that question. Gurpreet Singh, thank you very much, sir. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so we can move on to the next subject. Or
great, absolutely.
So we can talk about our mead. Yes, we can go on to mead.
We like to talk about mead. This is one of my favorites. We here in the shop that we just opened are waiting very patiently for the state that regulates the alcohol licensing to give us a permit where we can actually be a winery and start making mead here in house. So it's a passion of mine to make mead. I love it so much. Taking honey and water and combining them to produce this delicious beverage has been happening all throughout human history, and things that are documented go back as far as you could imagine, where people discuss their tricks and recipes and things that they did to make mead. The picture you see here in the slide is a fun one. It is the visit I told you about earlier, where I actually got to go to England to the National Honey Show. I hope you all can go someday. They have about 30 classes for mead in their honey show, which is huge. Unless you're going to a show specifically devoted to brewing or mead, I don't know that there's another one that has that many classes. So this is just one wall in the room I was in. I got the great opportunity to be a steward of the mead room. So I didn't witness all of the judging, and I can't imagine how long it must have taken them to taste. This is just a small percentage of all of the entries for that show, but there were a few judges at the end that took all of the first places from each class, and I did get to witness this part. It was pretty extraordinary. They tasted each first place from each class to determine the best in show for all of the mead classes. And lucky me, they gave me a little taste, and it was probably some of the most delicious mead that has ever passed my lips. So it gave me the enthusiasm and encouragement that sets sort of a place of achievement for producing mead and having a good quality mead and wanting to learn more about it. So if you've never had the opportunity, let me encourage you that mead is something very simple that you can do at home with a little bit of honey and water, a small amount of honey. Usually if I'm making a small batch, like a gallon container, I would take about 3 pounds of honey and the rest of the volume to fill up the container of water. And if you don't have access to a yeast that's produced commercially, you can still make mead, no worries, because nature provides, and there's yeast present in the honey and in your environment, so you can still make a nice batch of mead. I always recommend starting for the first time using a recipe. Thankfully, we all have access, most of us, right, have access to other people that we can talk to, books, and the computer, which gives us the ability to search for things. So you can find a nice recipe. If you don't find one, I'm willing to share a recipe, no problem. But basically you combine honey and water and allow it to sit. The yeasts that are naturally present will convert the sugars in your honey to alcohol. And that usually takes a few weeks. Mead gets better with age, usually a good year at the very minimum for a nice young mead to start to taste good. And so there's quite a bit of skill to develop to make a really nice tasting mead. Again, you can use fruit and herbs and spices and things that are naturally occurring in your area to highlight and feature things that are special about where you live, including the honey. It's a big category. I spend all day just on it, but I'm going to move on to getting it ready for a honey show. So you've made mead, and one style of mead is just the simple version of honey and water without any additives. And you're going to do the same thing you did with mead that you did for extracting honey and making your wax cakes and your comb and section and chunk comb. And you're going to choose your best tasting honey. People will always ask if they can take a honey that's slightly fermented or has an off flavor or something off about it, high moisture, and make it into mead. And my answer is yes, you can, but it may not have a better flavor and likely won't once it's produced into alcohol. That flavor that was there before will still likely present itself or alter the mead in a way that isn't desirable. So especially if you're going to go through the great deal of effort to be ready for a honey show, I'm going to go ahead and recommend you use your best honey and the cleanest water you can get your hands on, filtered water, not distilled water. Distilled water is really lacking in flavor. All the minerals and everything about it has been removed. But a nice filtered water, if you have access to fresh spring water, even better. Anything you can do to get a water that has a nice flavor and a honey that has a nice flavor. If you have access to commercially produced yeast, it gets rehydrated and added to the honey and water. The yeast itself is just a really a way to guarantee that the sugars are converted into alcohol. So you're not relying on nature. You're giving it the advantage of making sure that there's a yeast present. And that's something you can experiment with. To get ready for a honey show, you're going to take mead that you produced hopefully a year prior, and you're going to have several bottles. Usually you only need one bottle for a class. So it's not like the other classes where you have to have 3 identical entries because it's hard enough just to make a really good mead sometimes. So one really good bottle will do the trick. And depending on how much sugar you started with and honey, your mead will end up being dry or sweet, your traditional mead. So your honey show may have a separate class for dry or sweet, or they may just have one class for traditional mead, just honey, no added flavors, and they may allow both dry and sweet mead to be in that class. And when you're getting your mead ready, the one important thing is you have the extra bottles and they've been aging for quite some time, almost, a year or longer. And lots of things can happen in that time. Your corks could degrade, or maybe you thought you got the cork in the bottle properly when you put it in the bottle, but it wasn't quite right. So some air got in and your mead turned to vinegar, or when you transferred, happens to the best of us. When you transferred your mead, there was a little sediment in there that you didn't notice. So when you go to get this mead ready, I recommend wherever you store it, it's a cool and dark area, and you bring the bottles out in advance and you stand them up. This way the sediment can settle to the bottom and the nice clear mead that you want for show is at the top. And you're going to be siphoning some of this clear mead into a bottle that is the right bottle for what the show requires. So in the rules and regulations, the show will specify a size, and usually it's a 750 milliliter bottle. This is a pretty typical size wine bottle. And it will also mention the type of cork to use, usually a standard cork or what they call a T cork. The T cork is the type of cork that has a little plastic round top and a natural cork underneath. And these are used once wine bottles are open to make it easier to open and close for the duration of the rest of, drinking and using the mead or wine. So you can look that one up. It's just a small little cork that is not as troublesome to remove. You don't need any special corker or device to try to get these tea corks out. They're very simple to use. So a lot of honey shows like them because it's easier for the judges to take those corks out. But whatever the show decides to do, you'll follow the rules for the type of bottle. And again, you're going to clean everything just as you did with the other entries earlier. You're going to wash out your bottles, make sure they're dry, no sediment, no bubble film or soap or anything. And then you're going to carefully siphon or pour your mead into your bottle to get it ready for the show. But before you do that, here's what I recommend. Open each bottle. If I were to make one bottle of mead for a show, I would start with 3 bottles of my favorite mead that has been aging. I would take them all out, let them sit on a counter in a cool, dark place for a couple days to settle. And then I would uncork each one carefully, and I would smell the aroma from the bottle as I remove the cork. Sometimes you'll notice something that's off, like a musty smell or a chemical smell or something. And believe me, it's easy to not remember to do this, because I've done it before, where I've had this wonderful mead because I opened one bottle and I tested it and it was delicious. And the same meads from the same batch I didn't test. And I combined the 3 and went through the process of making sure the mead was flawless. The bottle was filled properly. The cork was beautiful. The bottle was polished. But I served the judges a mead that maybe had a contamination from air or something, and they spit it out.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
yeah.
man.
So do yourself the favor of opening and testing each mead before you prepare your bottle. And you very carefully siphon or pour this mead into your bottle, and you want to fill it to the proper level. And I know we talked earlier about filling your honey jars exactly to the top of that one ring around the top of the jar, right above the shoulders, underneath the threads. Well, for mead, you have a cork that's going to go in the bottle. And the cork, once it's placed in the bottle, should be seated just below the top of the bottle. We say 1/8 of an inch, but it's really just a very small amount of space. So when you're using a corker to place your cork in, and this is a special device that you may have to purchase, or you may have to find someone that has one to borrow to get your corks in, because corks are very snug when they go into these bottles. It really isn't something you can do by hand. You need this either hand corking device or what they call a floor corking device. And the corks get pushed into the bottle, and it really needs to be calibrated so that the cork sits just under the top edge of the bottle. And then the level of mead should be about a 1/2 inch below the bottom of that cork. And I can show you that now if, Richard, you have a second to let me have the screen. So now I pulled this bottle of mead out to bring, and again, it shows you more flaws than perfection. And so we have a cork that is slightly under the surface, but really should be a little lower. It's really just at the very top. So I would recalibrate my corker so this cork would just go just a little bit lower than that. 1/8 of an inch is perfect. I also, maybe you can see that this cork is a little wet here. So this bottle's been laying on its side for about 4 years. And my job is to rotate the bottle every year and make sure the cork doesn't have any damage. But this has been sitting for probably 2 or 3 years without any monitoring. And I've got some damage here, and I've likely got some oxidation because I have some degraded cork on the side here. This isn't a mead that I liked a lot after it was produced, and I didn't have high hopes for it. So I'm not imagining that it's much better now. But this is the bottom level of the cork right here. And if I was to fill this for a honey show, I would get out a ruler and I would fill the bottle just a 1/2 inch below that cork. So you would hold the cork outside the bottle before you seat it in there, and you would carefully put all that delicious mead that you've tested in, and you would stop right at that 1/2 of an inch below level, and then you would seat your cork in there. And that would be adequate for the show. Again, you want to make sure and test each little drop of mead that you're going to put in that bottle. And if you feel like you need to filter the mead for any reason, if there's any kind of chance that there's any sediment or something in the environment that might get in there, you can use a funnel and a paper coffee filter or something like the cotton t-shirt. The cotton t-shirt is going to be something you're going to never stop thinking about after this presentation, but something just that would carefully remove possibly any sediment. Again, you want the clearest mead you can, and you want the fermentation to have completely happened, not any more fermentation happening. So no bubbling. If you notice bubbling after you cork your mead, all of the sugars may not have been properly converted into alcohol. And so you may have some incomplete fermentation. And if it tastes particularly sweet, that's another indication that you may not have completed fermentation. Doesn't mean that it's bad, but it's just could cause some pressure inside the bottle. And when you go to open it, the cork may pop out. But that wouldn't be a good mead for the competition. So there's a lot to learn about mead to really get a good entry. Again, I would ask the show committee to be forgiving and understanding and allow people to feel encouraged and start producing meads now. And if you've got some meads going, I'm excited to hear about it sometime, so that you can have something nice to enter in the show.
All right, that's great. I have a quick question from Jamila. She's swinging us back to beauty products.
No problem.
Let me let Jamila ask her question. Jamila, you can go ahead, unmute your mic and please ask your question.
Okay, previously somebody asked about scented candles. I was wondering, and you said it's just keep it simple. I was wondering for the soaps and other beauty products, can you add other things to that beeswax, or just keep it simple, it's just the same way?
I definitely recommend adding some things to the beauty products. You can also leave it natural if you want, but like here's a bar of soap that I used, a little bit of like a natural mineral pigment to make a little coloring. And I've added some mint and raspberry essential oils and fragrances to the soap. And I would expect that the judge, you know, if they found the scent appealing, and the soap worked really well, and that included some beeswax and honey, that might be a good scoring item. And then the same goes for this cream that we make. It's a hand and body cream. We use our own wax and honey in this hand and body cream, but we also make all of the tinctures that are in there with the herbs, and we use a lot of healthy oils. And so there is a little fragrance to it. And again, we add propolis to this as well. So we would think that it might be a nice item for the judges to try, even though there's some things that have been added to it. So yeah, I think that the beauty products class is a nice way for you to experiment with your wax and your honey and be able to add some other additional ingredients and fragrances.
Great.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
No worries.
Is there a standard size? For example, would you have to present in a particular size jar, like 2-ounce jars for your creams, and 4-ounce molds or 2-ounce molds? Is there a standard size that you're looking for, or it doesn't matter?
Usually with the beauty products, it's not a standard size unless it's noted in the rules. And again, I usually ask the honey show to be a little lenient with that type of thing, unless they're looking to see that somebody can make something in duplicates or triplicates to have the exact look or exact texture or exact fill level. But standard, no, usually not. Usually you can just make one of something and no particular size.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All right, we have a question from Karen Cumberbatch. Karen, let's see if we can get Karen up to ask her question. Hi, Karen. Oops. Nope. Yeah. Hi, Karen, you can go ahead with your question, please.
I just basically want to know, I know you're talking about the honey show and showcasing the products. And I recognize that Jennifer made mention of soaps and lotions. So I was just wondering if there's a program or a course that would teach you how to actually make these things.
What country are you in?
Barbados.
Barbados. I would suggest you reach out to your local Ministry of Agriculture, the Business Development Unit.
Mm-hmm.
There should be some help there.
Okay.
But but Jennifer, you may have some suggestions. I'm not sure. There should
Sure.
be a lot of stuff online.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff online. There's some great books out there. If you want to reach out to me after this, I can try to look up. I have a couple of really nice books. One is called Beeswax Craft.
Okay.
I forget the author's name, but the woman Carla that's going to be on tomorrow actually had the author slated to visit for one of the conferences that got canceled due to COVID. But
Okay.
Carla has a really nice website with some resources, and we're planning something in April online as well. And I'm going to be doing some beeswax candles and beeswax rendering. So if you can attend that, I will definitely cover some of that in that hands-on education.
Okay. Sounds good.
If you're in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Grenada, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, as part of our regional biodiversity, apiculture and biodiversity program, we will incorporate this some level of training into soap making and candle making and so forth. And what we'll try to do is, Karen, as you're in Barbados, we'll definitely try to make that package or that offering online, so at least you can participate from Barbados and get some insight. We have a wonderful young lady by the name of Shamika, and she makes some great candle products for me, and she does some great soaps and she does something called solid lotions and so forth. So it's something that we could definitely look at. But as I said, for those countries in the Caribbean that are in a 6-country regional apiculture biodiversity project, they will definitely be able to get you up to speed in your cosmetics production. One of the outputs from this project is to look at value-added products, not just to rely so heavily on honey. With climate change being a real reality, one year you may make 3 or 4 gallons per hive, and the next year you might struggle to make 2 gallons per hive. So if you're a full-time beekeeper or a part-time beekeeper, to rely on those odds might be very difficult for you. So if you can get into making other products from the hive to supplement your income, it might be beneficial to you. So this is one of the things that we are looking at through our program, this regional project.
Okay.
All right.
So
But
should I
definitely
send you my
I'm getting
email?
a lot of stuff coming up online. So what I'll probably do when Jennifer does the program in April, we can probably share the links through our network, and so everybody be able to participate. So we'll put you on the mailing list. Everybody who participates today, we put you on our mailing list. And once Jennifer does organize her project in April, we'll definitely share the links, and you'll be able to participate.
Great.
That way also. All right.
I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Great thing, Karen. Thanks for your question. Great stuff. Bye. Okay, so we've done Karen. I see a couple of questions come in. Siobhan Walker, I would also like to be a part of the April course. So you got some participants already. And Ayo Xavier, heard you mention a few different Caribbean islands. How can Antigua and Barbuda be involved, or do you have an association? Ayo, well, we will hopefully in our regional project, we can upscale it again to include all the other Caribbean islands that missed out this time round. We do have a regional organization, Association of Caribbean Beekeepers, and I will add you to the mailing list. And as the weeks and months develop, there'll be a lot of initiatives that will be undertaken via the organization to reach out to countries such as Antigua. If you drop me an email, I can put you in contact with the Beekeepers Association in Antigua and give you at least a telephone number and an email address and a contact name, so you can reach out to somebody in Antigua directly that can help bring you forward in your quest to participate in apiculture. All right, I hope that answers your question, Ayo. So shall we push on, or we're going to take a break? What do you want to do?
Can we take a short break?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Let's have How long are we gonna do? 15 minutes? It's or 10-minute break, 10 minutes?
10 minutes is great.
Okay, so everybody, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. And we'll start at 1:30 Atlantic Standard Time. That'll be 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. So we'll take a 10-minute break, folks. Let me see if my technical team's listening and I can get them to play a nice video in a nice 15 during the 15-minute program while we take this break. So let's take a break for 10 minutes. Thank you for your time, everybody, and we'll be back.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune into the
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 6th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision and Sustainable Futures, confronting the threats of climate change and climate variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The
Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
In our small initiative, we managed to develop a beehive monitoring system in which beekeepers can keep track of the beehives around the year and can share the information with expert beekeepers in the group. The centralized information repository can help the beekeepers connect with buyers locally and over internet, where e-commerce is possible without the involvement of any middleman or agents. Our aim is to ensure better income for the beekeepers and pure honey for the consumers with the assistance of technology.
Unleash Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Welcome back. Welcome back. How are we doing, Jennifer?
Great.
All right. So that was a great intermission there. I hope everybody had a moment to do whatever they had to do. I actually found a tin of the silicone spray for your molds when you're making your wax. So this is what it looks like. It's Cami 1080. I think I bought this from Man Lake. I got my molds from Man Lake. Quick plug for Man Lake. But that's the stuff you're looking for your molds. Yeah, I don't have anything. I had one question for you. So forgive for those of you that speak extremely good Creole in this, I have a question for you. So in St. Lucia, we have a tree that flowers in late September, October. The Creole name for it is called Lachi Lamawi. Now, the honey from that tree is slightly green. How would you grade that one?
Is it a light color with the hue of green, or medium,
It's
or
a
dark?
light color. It's a kind of like a it's a really odd color. I think if you put that in a black light, I'm sure it'd be fluorescent. The wax from that tree is fluorescent green. You can,
Wow.
when it flower, when you see the bees put it in the comb and it's fluorescent green. It's beautiful.
I'd love to see a picture of that sometime.
Yeah, October. I'll send you some pictures in October. But the honey has a very curious, interesting taste. Very interesting taste.
Yeah, if you get a chance to send me the name of the tree, I want to look up the genus too, because I'd be interested to see what it's related to, because we probably have some similar plants here. And I know between the tupelo and our invasive Brazilian pepper, the tupelo, the true tupelo, has a little bit of a green hue to it as well.
Okay.
But I don't know that the wax does. But the Brazilian pepper in the hive is like literally like fluorescent yellow. Both the honey and the wax. It's like, it's so yellow. It's unbelievable.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I'd love to see.
It has a very nice flavor as well. My favorite, there's a tree that also flowers at that time of the year. The Creole name for it is savonette tree.
Okay.
The flowers, people used to use it back in the days to wash. The flowers love it. They used to wash with it.
So it has like saponins, like natural soap.
Maybe, and it has a very nice kind of taste like licorice. It's my favorite honey. That's why I always keep a special couple of buckets of that for myself at the end of the year. So
Thanks for sharing that. That's pretty much the most exciting part for me about this. I love sharing, but I get so excited to learn about other people, where they live, the honey.
Yes. No, you're doing a fantastic job. I'm hands down. This is really, really great, really great. I was just speaking to one of my other colleagues. Can you remake honey ice cream? Yes. Oh, who's that? Patricia.
Creamed honey?
Cream honey. Yes, cream. Can we make honey and cream honey? Yeah. Somebody just asked that question.
So if you'd like to include creamed honey in the show, is it something that's pretty common or interesting to you there? Do you think, I know comb honey is, but do you think creamed honey is something the customers are like a value-added product that you think the customers are?
There's one, I know one or two people. I know one person in St. Lucia makes it. I cannot speak to the other islands.
Yeah.
But I know one person. I know one person in St. Lucia makes it.
It's pretty popular here right now, and even some places like this came from the UK, and it's not adulterated at all. It's just the honey that naturally, comes off the bees. The crystals are already forming, but they're the sugars that have a very smooth texture once creamy. So 57 degrees and lower, and the bees, the sugars are already starting to change.
The rapeseed oil does that. The rape does
so
that
quickly. So quickly.
Even I think the sunflower does that partially, I think, as well. Yeah,
sunflower typically settles though, like you have a layer of creamed, and then the high moisture honey sort of floats to the top. Yeah, but if you want to make creamed honey, I just recommend taking a honey that will cream with a nice smooth texture, not a large sugar granule, and then experiment a little with it. Here I use saw palmetto honey because it works really, really well. And again, I use 57 degrees for a few weeks. I introduce a seed, which the word seed is just another word for a starter. So if we're going to make creamed honey here, we use 1 part starter and about 10 parts liquid honey, a honey that, and then we put it in 57 degrees after we incorporate the two till there's no more streaking or complete uniformity is achieved. And then we put it in the jars and let it sit for a few weeks until it gets that texture, smooth, creamy, spreadable. When you enter this type of honey in the show, this is actually 2 set. You know, it's all, there are classes in Europe where the honey is soft set, and very set. And in the US, we usually just have one class for creamed honey. And what we're looking for is a creamed honey that when you open the jar and you tip it slightly, it starts to break. So the honey is still set, but it starts to move just a little bit. And when you bring a spoon through it, it's smooth and creamy, and it doesn't fill the gap very quickly that you made with the spoon, but it will start to even back out. That's a perfect setness. And creamed honey is great. You should all try to make it if you have access to a honey that will do that. And your customers will love it.
Okay.
And yeah, it would be a nice addition to the honey show, Richard.
Okay, we'll definitely consider that. So, okay, my good friend here, Anthea, she's just giving me the scientific name for the savonette tree. I don't know where she got that from, and I will not try and embarrass myself to pronounce it. But it's in the chat. I'll probably email it to you.Maybe you could find it. I'll email it to you. It's in the chat. Local.
That would be great. I would love
Well,
to.
I'm not even going to try and pronounce the Latin name, but she has provided the Latin name for it.
I've already cheated and read it, and I don't know the genus, so I'm excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic. It's one of the most beautiful honeys you'll get in the year. Goes here. I know it's in Trinidad as well because I've seen it in Trinidad. But it's a really, really beautiful. It's very flowery. Very nice flowery bouquet to it.
I really hope I get to visit in December and try some of these.
Yes, man. We have to find a way to do that. You'll be in here in December, man. I have no fear of that, man. I have no fear of that.
Great.
I'm overly confident of that taking place. All right, so let's continue down the yellow brick road.
Yeah, we've got more fun stuff to cover for sure.
Yeah, we got a couple of more topics to cover. And we're on our cakes now.
Baking with honey. And before we move on, I don't feel like I gave the flavored honey much, the flavored mead too much topic of discussion. I might just mention a little bit about that real quick and then move on to baking. But the baking slide would be perfect if you want to pull that up, Richard, whenever.
Yeah, it's up and running.
Oh, that's great. So just to finish on the mead, we talked a lot about the standard mead, just honey and water. And I may have mentioned just a little bit about using what you have available from your region or your area. And now we talked even more about the honeys that come from where you are, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you have something special and unique that identifies where you are. And I think making mead with some of those other fruits and spices is great. And so you have that class, the flavored mead class, available to utilize. So you can make the classic mead, which could be dry or sweet. And then I would highly recommend adding some fruit or spices to a mead. And as far as the recommended amount to start, if you're going to make a small batch of mead, try to follow a recipe. If I'm doing a gallon, where before we talked, I mentioned like 3 pounds of honey, and then the rest water, you might use part of that water, a juice that you made from a fruit that you're wanting to feature in there, the flavor of. Just be careful if the fruit has any bitterness to it in the peel, like in the way of citruses. Sometimes we'll forget that and we'll include the peel, and we'll add up ending a little bit too much bitters, but some bitter can be good. It's nice to cover all the different flavors that are available to the palate, the sweet, salty, bitter, spicy. So you can play around with some of those things, and do let me know how you enjoy making mead and what kind of results you get, especially if you try that amazing honey Richard was just talking about and make mead out of it. So we're going to move on to baking, and this picture is a really nice photo just to show you how different some of the honey cakes can look from one another. Right away, your eye might go to the one in the front that looks like a light colored cake and wonder why all of the other cakes are so dark and different looking. If your show would allow to have a standard recipe for your honey cake class, you'll find that the recipes are usually pretty simple as far as the ingredients go. And we'll revert back to what we said throughout the entire presentation. Use your best honeys. And again, the second tip we made before about combining two honeys, don't be afraid to blend. Use something a little darker or a little richer in flavor, along with your sweet or other types of honeys that have more floral notes or other notes. So go ahead and blend honeys for a honey cake, and you'll find that you'll get some amazing results. But the rest of the ingredients in a standard honey cake are pretty simple: flour, baking soda, butter, and honey. And there's really a couple eggs. There's really not much else in it. So the skill is definitely going to be the baker and the size of the pan, the volume of the recipe, and then how you can actually bake this cake off. That's such a simple cake without it being too dark or too light, uncooked, overcooked, not risen enough, cracks, no cracks. So all of you bakers out there that are tuning in, you know the terminology I'm using is common, and or you're already chuckling because you know how hard it could be to bake even a simple cake with a simple recipe. But at the end of the day, if everybody has the same recipe and is using the same ingredients other than their honey, their skill is going to be the thing that determines the outcome of the cake. And the judge is really looking to smell and taste the honey in the cake, as well as the proper bake. And all of the rules were followed for the size of the cake. So there will be a cake pan size indicated in the rules that everybody should use, and then a basic recipe with a basic temperature. So it may seem very simple, but I will tell you that we, over the years, have tried so many different cakes, some of them unbelievable. I mean, you could smell the honey before you even cut into the cake. Perfectly baked, nice little surface texture, no cracks, no fallen centers. And then you cut the cake open and you find something, either too much baking soda or too dry or overbaked or underbaked. So don't let this class fool you. It's a lot of work to get this nice cake, and people are very eager to make the cakes. I encourage you to make the cakes, but make a few, just like we said earlier about everything else we've talked about today. You're going to practice this cake recipe. You're going to make a few. Your neighbors, your friends are all going to eat lots of cake. Everybody's going to be full and very familiar of what honey cake tastes like until you get it just right so you can enter the competition. But there's really not much else to share about it other than in some places, like in Europe, the National Honey Show, and other places we've either attended shows or had the pleasure of judging, there can sometimes be some dried fruit added, like currants. But other than that, it's really a pretty standard recipe. So try your hand at this and let me know what your thoughts are afterwards. The fun class for baking with honey is the open class. This is the one where we also say the honey show staff or organization could allow people that aren't beekeepers to enter, and they could have purchased honey, or even beekeepers could have purchased honey for this class. So that's a consideration for you. And the sky's the limit. There's no recipe. The only thing in the rules might be saying that it has to include honey in the recipe and detectable during smell or taste. So you could make a cookie, you could make a cake, a cupcake. It could be in the buttercream frosting. It could be so ornate and decorated. You could be painting bees and honeycomb all over it. So you could really have a great time with the open class. And I personally enjoy judging the open class. I haven't met a baked goods with honey that I didn't like. Baklava is a good one. There's lots of cookies and cakes. You can find recipes all over, all throughout history. Cultures have utilized honey because it's a humectant. It really can improve and add some great quality to baking. You'll find it in breads, so don't hesitate to make breads. Honey butter. Again, I could probably go into a pretty deep dive on baked goods, but just to give you as much info as needed, you can see these are simply wrapped with some plastic wrap. There's usually a cake bag that you can get from a bakery. Here we have local grocery that has a cake bag, and sometimes when we have the honey shows, we'll go ahead and ask them if we can purchase some of these cake bags. So depending on the rules set forth for the show, you'll find out if you can simply enter your cake on a paper plate with this plastic cover over it if you need to provide it, or if maybe the show, like you could bring your cake in a small container and that the show would be providing the paper plate, and the bag is another idea. And those ID labels that we talked about earlier. Richard, you may have missed this. We were talking about how the show, once you sign in with your entry form, the show staff will be assigning you an entry number and also an entrant number and an entry code, so that you'll bring those labels back over with you when you're preparing your entry. And in the rules, it'll state where to put the entry labels. So you might get 2 for your cake. One will go on the bag on the outside, and the other one might go on the paper plate when you take the cake out of the bag. This way, if the judge is judging and he's got or she's got 1 or 2 cakes out, they wouldn't make a mistake and mix up the cakes, because the label is not only on the bag, but it's on the paper plate.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, the entrant would be assured that their entry would be properly judged and placed, and there wouldn't be a mix up. So that's why that type of thing does happen. So baking with honey is pretty darn fun. I hope all of you are excited about it. And maybe some of you already baked with honey. I do. We have a honey cake recipe here from one of our honey judges that has been in his family for quite some time. Richard, I'll share it with you after.
I appreciate that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you can share it with the group. It's a real nice cake recipe. It
Yes.
uses a little bit of vegetable oil, some juice from an orange, some black tea, as well as flour and honey, and a couple of other additives, simple things, some spices like clove and nutmeg and cardamom. And it's a nice cake, but it is a bit of a spice cake. So we don't consider it like a standard cake recipe because there's just too much going on. So
sending me back to my days as a Boy Scout when I used to bake cakes as a Boy Scout. So you see, you may tempt me to go back into my my cake baking mission days.
I hope everybody gets tempted into the baking arena. Again, it's a fun class. Don't let it fool you, though. It is a bit tricky to get that standard cake recipe just right. I've made plenty of them, and I honestly have never gotten one that won an award yet. So it's on my list to continue to try harder to do a great standard cake. Maybe even in Europe one day, I'll actually enter and place a cake in a competition there. I'd be shocked if I ever got to that level, because the people that I'm would be competing with would have many years experience making this type of cake, and definitely have an edge or an advantage over me. So it's kind of nice to have that humility and share with you that
it's so good fun. It's so good fun.
Yeah, it's good fun. So if anybody has any questions about baking with honey or baked goods, we can open it up for questions before we move on to the art and photography.
No, I don't see any questions yet. What? No questions? Amazing. Amazing. We're talking about
Great.
food here, man. Food. No one's got any questions about food.
That's quite all right. We'll get into the art and photography, and Richard will...
No, we've got 2 people with their hands raised. Sorry, I am mistaken. I am mistaken. We have 2 persons with the... Okay, so I don't think it's Clive, but anyway, it says Clive Dutiful, but I don't think it's Clive, but let's allow Clive to speak. Clive, can you unmute your mic, please?
Yes, I can. He's
Thank
right
you.
there, don't worry. He's not too far. My question is there a proportion where you can say, okay, instead of 2 pounds of sugar or 1 pound of sugar, then we use 2 cups of honey for a cake recipe, or for any baked goods recipe, if you want to substitute sugar for honey? Is there a standard substitution measurement that can be used? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a website you can go to for the National Honey Board. And on their website, they have a substitution of honey for sugar conversion chart for baking. And it's pretty neat to see just, the amount of honey that you'd use in place of sugar in a baked good. And I think you'll find the chart pretty easily, but if for some reason we don't, we could try to grab that link and send it out to the group, Richard.
Yes, definitely. I shall. It's something I'm making notes. I'm making notes. National Honey Board.
Yes, the National Honey Board.
Thank
That's
you.
a great question. Thank you.
All right. We have another hand up. We have Karen. Let me try and get Karen. Let's get Karen on the mic. Karen, can you unmute your mic, please?
Hi. I just have a quick question. With regards to the show, I heard Jennifer mention about the scent. I believe that's the judges being able to actually smell the scent of honey. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So is there a certain type of honey that you would need to use in terms of aging? Would it have to be fresh, or can it be honey that you would have made, say, like a year prior to the show?
So the timing of how long ago you extracted the honey isn't as important as maybe what the honey is going to offer or showcase in scent and flavor when you're baking with it. And sometimes you have to experiment a little bit in order to get that answer. If you've ever baked with molasses or sorghum or any other syrup that has a different flavor, and haven't tried honey much, you might try, like I suggested, a little bit of honey blending. You might try working with some honeys that are distinct and unique, both in sweetness and imparting a unique flavor or aroma, and also some of the honeys that are a little bit more robust and dark, but maybe not like the whole honey component being the darker, robust honey.
Okay.
So like a blend of 2 or 3 honeys. Say I had a really dark avocado or buckwheat honey, and I needed a cup of honey. I might use like a third or a quarter of the buckwheat, and I would use a real sweet honey like my orange blossom for another portion. And then I had the honey like Richard was talking about that has this unique characteristic that's distinct and pretty pronounced, and it's floral or spicy or a combination. I might add that to the third component, third portion of the honey, and practice a cake with it. And when it's done cooling and you want to smell the cake, you literally can just lift the cake up to your nose and give it a good smell. And my hope is that you can smell that honey right then and there. That's the goal. The judge is going to cut the cake in half as well and smell it. But you want to have that distinct ability to smell some honey in the cake for sure.
Okay, great.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Awesome.
Great question, Karen. Great question. Hope
Yeah.
to taste some of that cake in the next competition. I'm looking forward to that cake by Karen Cumberbatch. I'm definitely going to take a slice.
So
All right, win or lose, I'm taking a slice.
We have over 380 people, right, Richard?
Yeah, that's what the hope was. Although I didn't see, we got up to 117 today. We had 388 people registered, but we only got up to 117 this morning.
So we have 117 cakes due in December. Is that right?
Well, that's a lot of, I better lose a lot of weight then. As I'll get punished afterwards for it. Okay, thanks for the question, Karen. We have, I saw there was a couple of other people with the hand up. All right, I guess we've got Siobhan. Let's get Siobhan's got an interesting question. Siobhan, oops. Yeah, if you can unmute your mic and ask your question. Hi, Siobhan.
Hi, good day, everyone. I just wanted to find out if there's any caution we need to take with regards to baking and honey for fear of overheating and losing its nutritional value.
I feel like I heard part of it. I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to find out if there's any extra precaution that we need to take when cooking with the honey for fear of overheating to lose its nutritional value.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you so much. So the standard recipe for the cake, usually the temperature for baking this particular type of cake is around 325 degrees Fahrenheit. And the way that the recipe is designed is to cook it to just done. And you can probably even turn the oven off and leave the cake in the oven. This is a special tip I'm sharing with all of you, right? So like about 5 or 10 minutes before the cake is really all the way done, and you insert like a toothpick or something to make sure that the liquid is congealed and the cake is completely done, you might even consider turning the oven off about 5 minutes before the end of the bake time. And this also will help retain some of the aroma and flavor of the honey, but usually without overheating it. And the way this recipe is designed and how much honey is incorporated, there isn't too much of a risk or issue of overheating or doing anything that would hurt the honey.
Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Siobhan. Great question. Great question. Our pleasure. All right. Do I see anybody up? Karen, you want to ask another question, or you forgot to take down your hand? Which one? You have another question, Karen? All right, we can always try.
No, I forgot to take down my hand. Sorry.
All right, cool. No problems. All right. Okay, so if that's all the cake questions, which were great, I love the sense. Sounds like I'm going to have some interesting cake to taste, possibly.
Excellent.
If I'm lucky. Let's move on to our last slides, or penultimate slide, I think.
Excellent.
Art and photography.
I'm really excited that you would consider having art and photography in your honey show. It's one of the classes, two of the classes that I particularly enjoy. And I feel like it takes quite a bit of time to develop the skill to be a good judge for these classes. And I think sometimes they're even overlooked as far as how difficult it is to produce art and photography that would merit an award in a honey show. Again, there's honey shows that happen all over the world and have been happening for hundreds of years. And then there are some wonderful local and regional shows that also host some amazing art and photography. So it's wonderful to take time to be with your bees, and the experience that you have when you're with them is something that's difficult to share. Art and photography are one way that we get a chance to give people a glimpse of the magic that we experience as beekeepers and what we see in nature.
Yes, yes, yes.
But in a honey show, the judges are usually inundated with some images that, I'm going to be polite when I say this, but I'm just going to say it. A bee on a flower. This is something that, I want to be polite. I'm going to encourage you to think a little bit outside the box. Like the picture I shared with you here is a little bit a different image, something that maybe is a little bit more, gives the person a little sense of, even their adrenaline might peak a little because they see the swarm and the beekeeper shaking the branch, and it's not the same. A bee on a flower is magical. It's beautiful. To behold it is something that we are all lucky to witness in any person anywhere on the planet. But it's somewhat overdone in art and photography for a honey show. So my first encouragement would be to think carefully and maybe come up with something a little bit more unique, to give the judge something to be excited about. And that will also set you apart from some of the other entrants if they hadn't heard that tip before. So that's my first thought. My second thought is to make sure to take good time and care, like we do with all the other entries, to prepare your entry. So read the rules carefully, because the entry could be simply, if it's a photograph, it could be simply required that it's mounted on a piece of stiff cardboard, or, to make things easy. The honey show committee or organization that's hosting the show may want their entrants to feel like this is a very achievable class, and that it isn't going to be an expensive or difficult task. So they may simply say that you could print the photograph and mount it on a piece of cardboard, that it's freestanding. So you have to put a little time and care into making sure it can stand up with something holding it up. And then there's usually an index card or a piece of paper accompanying it that won't include your name, because again, we don't want the judge to know who you are. We don't want you in the photograph because we don't want the judge to know it's you. And we want to be able to give everybody the same fair judgment of each entry. So there may be some sort of standard as far as like size, again, the mounting. But do take care that the image is, the paper is in good condition if it's photo paper, and that you bring it to the show in some sort of sleeve or encased in something so it doesn't accidentally get scratched or have your morning coffee on it, which I've done many times with important things. Again, just trying to share some, tips that I find really helpful. And then find a subject that is as interesting as possible. And then the clarity and focal point of your photo for focus should be one that draws your eye right to the area of the photograph that you want to be the featured area. So in this case, you immediately look towards the middle right, where the beekeeper has their arms raised and the bees are, and then you see the bees behind them. But yet on the left side, the grasses and the tree and the sky don't really catch your attention so much. So it's part of the photograph, but it's not really what I'm looking at. So think a little bit about your subject, the uniqueness, the rule. Pay attention to the rules and regulations so you get that photograph correct. Because I can't tell you how many times I've attended a show where we missed something in the rules and the photo didn't make it in the show because we forgot to make it freestanding, or we were outside like breaking a stick in the parking lot trying to use some tape to make the photo stand up. So anything you have to do to get it right before you bring it. But the photography part is really fun. Art is a lot like the open class of baking. Yes. Again, the rules and regulations will, specify what mediums you can use. Usually it can be anything from textile to painting to sculpture, ceramics or pottery. And it could be something that you're creative with. And it may even be food. You may end up making something with a baked good or a health and beauty product, or even a display. And in some cases, some of the shows are starting to accept video as part of their art and photography. Essays where you would have like several photos that tell a story along with some information. So there's so much direction you can go with art and photography in a honey show that makes it more than just a bee on a flower, so I encourage everybody that it feels creative. And even if you don't, I think you should try your hand at it a little bit, especially if you like to bake or you like to make candles, or maybe you'd like to make a display with several items that you've created together that you feel like would catch the judge's attention, or even a gadget or something that you use in your beekeeping operation. There is a separate class sometimes just for gadgets, but maybe in this case, this show organizer would accept a gadget as a form of art. So that's a suggestion. And that's a lot of what I would like to share with you about art and photography. And then from here, I would like to ask Richard and everybody in the group if they wanted to spend some time. First, if you have any questions about art or photography. And second, if you wanted to spend some time answering questions for the rest of our time together about anything we discussed today.
Great. So I don't have any questions on that particular field. I can add, we do have one of our presenters for tomorrow with us, Gladstone Solomon, who has competed in the London Honey Show and has won a number of different certificates, and along with this contingent from Trinidad and Tobago. And hopefully tomorrow we will have Dr. Jessamine, possibly. She has a very busy schedule, who has actually won the Hender Cup, the international category at the London Honey Show. So we have representatives from 2 different countries that have either directly won the Hender Cup or have been associated with the winning of the Hender Cup.
Oh, this is really wonderful.
So in fact, Gladstone, well, I will not steal Gladstone's thunder. I shall leave that for tomorrow. Because by his presentation he's got from 1987 or 89 to 2000, some point in 2000, of Trinidad competing in the London Honey Show. So he's going to do a whole presentation of the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs, it's impossibly strange characters he's met along the way in his journey, and Trinidad and Tobago's journey in the London Honey competition. So it's going to be a very interesting 1 hour, lots of Trinidadian humor and jokes and so forth. So I think So I think that's going to be a great presentation for tomorrow.
That's fantastic, Richard.
Yeah, so that I don't know if is Gladstone there? Gladstone, you there? You want to say a couple of words? You want to plug your I'm giving you an opportunity to plug your event, my brother. Ah, there he is, brother Gladstone. Unmute your mic, sir.
Hey, Richard. Hey, Jennifer. Hi, team. Yeah, man, today is such a great day. Excellent presentation, a nice prep. So I'll just read from, the other side, I've served a little bit as a judge's steward, and I could, Jennifer, as I said, you're just on point with everything. And I would say, this is a National Honey Show, so there's no sympathy there, if it's not up to mark, it's just not up to mark.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, a nice balance. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's presentation as well. All right.
Wonderful.
Great, brother Gladstone.
That's all I'm gonna get today, man. Tune in.
Yes, a lot of your, I've got a couple of emails from people asking for your contact information, Gladstone. So I'm gonna shoot.
No problem.
Shoot your contact number and your telephone number to a few of your compatriots.
Yeah, we are servants of Caribbean beekeeping. So
yes, man.
To run it out. And for all of you out there, we so glad for your support. I understand we have some fantastic numbers. So tune in tomorrow, man. I'm gonna try to keep up with Jennifer, I'm gonna
No, man, I'm sure tomorrow is gonna be equally as interesting and intriguing and knowledge sharing and so forth. I just hope Dr. Jessamy can make it tomorrow. She didn't promise me. I asked her for an hour. She said, Richard, I'm too busy, man. I said, well, Doc, at least try and make a small cameo. If it's 10 or 15 minutes, just give us 10 or 15 minutes and hopefully we can.
Grandma's going to come through. Dr. Jessamy is going to be there. I put my head on. Jessamy, I'm putting my head on a block for you now.
Well, boy, you better get her on the phone after this.
That's what I'm going to do. I didn't want to tell you that.
All right. So it's been a great session. I'm looking at, okay, is there anybody got any questions? I don't see any questions. I don't see any questions in the question room. I don't know.
So Richard,
yes, we've got one. Okay, we've got one. Yeah, Galaxy J6. Please unmute your mic and go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that today's session was very educational. Something like this should be done, like say, on a more regular basis, so that the Caribbean people as a whole could really get involved in the beekeeping aspects in terms of business and that kind of stuff. But this is David Small, Barbados.
Yeah, hey David, my brother, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man.
That's good. That's good to hear your voice. Good to hear your voice, and I'm really happy that you could make it and give the event and the occasion your support.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Thank you, my
Thanks
brother.
so
much. I have a question there from somebody. I want to know what time is Gladstone. See, Gladstone, people are already asking what time is your presentation tomorrow. You're almost, I mean, if you're not famous by now, you're definitely gonna be famous by tomorrow morning. Let's see. What time? I think Gladstone is on for 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock, I think, is Gladstone's kickoff time. If I remember correctly. I'm just opening up my schedule and I'll be able to give you
Richard, I think it's 11.
It's 11, my brother?
Yeah.
Yeah, because yes. Okay, that's good. So it's 11. Gladstone's on at 11 o'clock. All right. So anybody have any questions? Anybody have any more questions? No more questions. No more questions. We've answered all questions.
If I may, just some closing remarks, Richard.
Yes. Definitely.
So tomorrow is sounding so fantastic. I don't care how busy I am. I feel like I need to tune in.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to do everything I can to join, but I just want to tell you that I think it's so amazing that we have such contribution to this cause, because this is really important. And I hope, if anything today, you not only got some information that may help you with entering honey shows, but that I have the opportunity to meet with you and visit with you and even be part of your honey show.
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah, at the very least, I'm happy to be of service and communicate, tell some stories, share some laughs, taste some honey and mead, and eat some cake together.
Definitely, definitely.
Don't be discouraged if you feel like some of the rules and stuff we shared today seemed a little strict. Please just try it out and give it a shot. It's a lot of work, and I know it's precious, valuable time and materials that we are not all fortunate to have an abundance of, especially with the way things are right now. But it is a common interest of us all that we share together, that unites us and gives us something exciting to do together. And we all enjoy being winners, but it's just as exciting for me to stand aside and help somebody else win. So that's part of it too for me, is once you learn some of the skill and you do a good job, and you win some awards, take a break and let other people take a time to an opportunity to test their skills and win some awards. There's harder shows for you to enter other places. I have a long way to go myself. I haven't won anything at the National Honey Show, so I have a lot of work ahead if I'm gonna have that to compete with the nice gentleman that's going to be speaking to you tomorrow. But I'm not despaired. You give me encouragement too, just by being interested in the competition and the categories and taking good care of yourself and your bees and nature. So I have to thank you for what you do, and Richard and the organization. I give you so much credit, and I appreciate you. So thank you for having me today.
Pleasure is mine. I'm gonna try and get Mr. Romulus, if he can give us some closing remarks, and then I shall say a few words as your humble servant. Mr. Romulus, would you like to say a few words, sir? Are you around, sir? Mr. Romulus. No, he's not there. He's there. Mr. Romulus, Giles? Yes, no. He must be on a call. He's probably on a conference call somewhere. All right, he'll get back to us. Just on my part, I would just like to thank everybody that signed in today. At one point we had over 117 of you guys, so I really think thank you for that blessing. We do have a exit survey. We're trying to compile some information for Jeff, so that Jeff can continue to invest in these little projects and these little events, provide us with the bandwidth, provide us with the tools such as paying for the Zoom, so that we can have these webinars and get the message of beekeeping and apiculture and the mystery of bees, to out there, and just to learn and to share the experience. So I think it's very essential that we do that. So I appreciate if everybody that participates can do the exit survey for us. It's just 10 simple questions. It's not going to take too much of your life. It was about 50 questions before I cut it down a little bit, but it's now just 10 questions. And if you could participate in that, I really want to thank Jennifer for taking her time out of a busy schedule, because New York snowed in, so everybody's coming down to Florida to try and escape escape the snow and get some sanity,
So true.
So I'm sure that the coffee shop's buzzing, or it should be getting ready to buzz for the lunchtime buzz soon. So I'm
it's
sure.
Buzzing. I hope you can all visit sometime.
Yes, so I really appreciate you taking time out to share your knowledge and experience and your love of the apiculture, your love of bees, and your love of what we can do together as a team. And I think one of the greatest caveats that we should all take from this is that just as the colony of bees work together as a team, we as beekeepers have to work together as a team, despite being separated by water. We need to use the technology and, you know, communicate and reach out to one another if you need support or knowledge or just to try a new idea. We have this forum available for us, and let's utilize it. And, you know, let's work together like bees and give us the support that we need together to elevate the industry in the Caribbean, and that the Caribbean and the Americas as a whole, because we are all one continent really, from South America right through the Caribbean basin up to North America. It's the Americas. We can work as a single unit and, you know, make sure that bees have a safe place within our hemisphere in the world. All right, so that's my note. That's my final words. Brother Solomon, I don't know if you want to say a few things about tomorrow, or you're good. You have to unmute. You have to unmute. Unmute your mic. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I got you. I got you.
All right, sir.
No, listen. Based on what I see, I have to top up my game, you know, and I'm working on that for the rest of the day. So there's gonna be some interesting anecdotal bits of information that, you know, went into making the package together, and that would surround and support Jennifer's very meaningful and excellent presentation. You know, I'm so glad, Rich, that, you know, we in the region here are moving in this direction. We've had individual honey shows, but down the road, maybe next year, and anticipating St. Lucia being a sort of headquarters for a Caribbean honey show plus other elements. I think this is an excellent sort of prep presentation that we're doing, right? Yeah.
Yes,
We still
definitely.
produce some of the best honeys in the world, and I'll share some records with you tomorrow to confirm that. And I got a surprise for you, Richard.
You have a surprise for me? Oh gosh. I guess I better show up for sure. I better show up, man. I better show up. But I just want to thank everybody once again. And remember to do the exit survey, please. Remember to do the exit survey. I remember we got a packed, really, really interesting day tomorrow. We've got Carla, we've got Gladstone, and we possibly, we have Dr. Jessamy on board tomorrow, because Gladstone put his head on the block. So
yeah, and I need my neck.
I would definitely be saying off with his head if she doesn't turn up. all the way from St. Lucia, I'll be saying off with his head, man. It'll be off. So,
I'll do the same for you, Rich.
Sorry, man. Thank you, my brother. Thank you. But definitely, once again, everybody who participated today, I really want to thank you for your presence. And take the exit survey. You know, we've done all we can. Let's try and bring this together. Caribbean unity. Let's not even call it Caribbean. Let's call it B unity, man. We are the B in the Caribbean, man. So let's bring everybody together. And let's work as a team, and let's keep this momentum. Many thanks, everybody. You know, Jennifer, once again, you're my hero. Thank you very much. All right.
Back to you.
Everybody, take care and bye. Take care. Bye.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Vision in Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first National Honey Bee Show Training Workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UWI, CYEN, and other corporate partners.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UE Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference is brought to you by GEF, SGP, UNDP, UE, CYEN, and other corporate partners.